The scientific revolution starts now.
The DemystifySci podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
Maybe before we even get to the book, so much has happened since you were on the show last time.
Tell me. Yes.
Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, that episode was killer, and people really, really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was the most sane presentation of a theory of consciousness that I've ever heard before.
Oh, thank you.
And we had Stephen Grossberg on the show since then. And Steve went into the details of it, but I'm not sure that he presented the ideas any more clearly than you did.
Yes, he's a genius, and he knows the details all the way down, but he never spent the time learning how to communicate with other people, so he just has a terrible time presenting it, which is one of the biggest reasons he's not better known, is because it's like the theory of relativity, and he's got to explain space-time is curved and these changes. It's very complicated, and he dives into the weeds immediately and expects everyone to follow, and it's tough. So certainly that's what I and my co-author Sagan were trying to do, and this book was finally take Steve's work and try to explain it in a way anybody can understand. But
so
in a way,
go ahead. No, go ahead. I didn't even interrupt you.
I was going to say, I like to say, though, to be completely honest, I think it's great for all of us that Steve never took any time to do it, that he didn't become famous. I think we'd all be worse off, because if he became famous at some early point in the career, then that would have taken over. But he has relentlessly, this is all he has done since he was 17 years old. He's in his 80s now, and he's still going. All he does every day of his life is model the brain, goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And for 65 years, there's not really something like this in the history of science, because usually you get famous and then things change. I mean, you still do work, but not at the same clip, not with the same intensity. But Steve, because nobody ever said, hey, he's a great scientist on the order of Einstein or Newton, he's still in his 80s trying to make it. It's like he's like Tom Brady, just with a huge chip on his shoulder, going all the way to the end. So he's gone so far, and he probably wouldn't have gone nearly as far if fame and success had come from
there's something about getting, especially in science, getting famous for a particular idea kind of forces you to live with that idea and defend it for the rest of your life. And I think there's something inherently plastic about science. I only work in one little area of science basically right now, but I constantly find myself discovering new things about the model that I'm working on, that force me to throw a lot of my old ideas in the trash. And that's a really hard thing to do if those ideas were famous already, right? It'd be
Tyler, I couldn't agree more. I think you hit the nail on the head with just the problem with the academic incentive culture, is that, like, if you do get a good idea, then you're just locked into it because everybody expects you to do it, and you need to defend it. What if your idea is wrong? And so that just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, so to speak. But like you said, in reality, if you're doing science, it's going to go in every wacky direction. You have no idea where it's going to go. Your initial idea is going to turn into another idea, and that's normal. But if you feel social pressures to keep with this one idea, then it causes troubles, and then you get locked into arguments because the idea gets calcified, and we're all locked. Is it nature versus nurture? We gotta resolve this fight, when really we should leave nature behind, or whatever the case may be. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Shallow.
Something else happened that was really interesting too. We had do you know Yosha Bach?
You guys have mentioned him before, and
okay.
I actually saw some clips of him on your show, but I don't know. I don't know of his work before you guys introduced me to him.
Yeah, we had a real dumpster fire of a conversation with him. It was highly contentious. It went on for 4 hours, and he's got a pretty big audience, and they all showed up in the comments section and told us that we were morons and don't know what we're talking about. And it was very strange because, we pointed to Grossberg and we pointed to you, and we know, because Grossberg told us, that they're actually in communication with each other, Bach and Grossberg, but he kind of claimed to not understand the solution that Grossberg was presenting, which might be true. Maybe he just genuinely doesn't understand it because it's very obtuse and very difficult to comprehend, I think, just because maybe the way that Steve presents it. But it was really hard for us to defend some of these ideas in the face of somebody whose primary metaphysical stance is that there is no solution to this problem, right?
But the way I think the hard problem is silly. It's 20th century. I mean, at this point, it's decades past the time to move on. It's like saying gravity is impossible. It's the hard problem. How can two objects that never interact influence one another? It's impossible. It's the hard problem, and we'll never solve it. Except, Einstein, more than 100 years ago, solved it on paper and pencil. It just takes some complex thinking. But you could still say, well, it's not really a solution because he didn't explain how two objects that aren't touching, how they're influencing each other. It's impossible. It's a logic problem. You're taking yourself out of the realm of the physical and moving into, like you said, the metaphysical. And in the metaphysical, you can have any position you want. You can say gravity is impossible. It reminds me of like Thomas Aquinas had all these proofs of God, proofs of God's existence, and it was like one is like the first mover. Everything is moving, therefore there must have been a first mover. Therefore, that first mover is God. All right, it's totally disconnected from physical reality. But if that's how you look at the hard problem, it's not possible for something physical to have subjective experience. You're just holding on to an idea. But if you don't actually bother to do the hard work of looking at the math and the physical reality of it, like Einstein did with gravity, like Grossberg did with consciousness in the mind, I don't know. I mean, Steve Grossberg he identified the physical dynamic of consciousness in 1982. This was long before Daniel Dennett even wrote Consciousness Explained. Grossberg had already identified the physical dynamic. He shared it with Dennett, explained it all to Dennett back then, and Dennett just wants to do his own thing. He's a philosopher. He wants to talk philosophy. He doesn't want to solve biological consciousness. He's solving a philosophical quandary, I guess.
And I think that's what I came across, is that people are just really enamored with the wrestling, I think. And so you talk to people and you very quickly realize that no one actually agrees upon what the hard question of consciousness is. I mean, probably among in philosophical circles, and once you get into the world of professors, maybe there's more of an agreement. But people all around the internet are kind of all in agreement that there is a hard problem of consciousness. And you start to drill down into, okay, well, what do you mean is the hard problem of consciousness? And somebody that I was talking to on Twitter the other day was like, well, why can't I experience what a bat experiences? And I'm like, I've never heard the hard problem formulated that way, but why would you think that you would be able to experience what a bat experiences if you're not a bat and you don't have
a bat brain?
A bat brain. It just
bat
seems
ears and bat wings.
It just seems so patently absurd. And I think that it really comes down to the fact that what people want is they want to be able to create a shortcut so that you can plug yourself into a computer and live the bat experience. That's the ultimate goal. It isn't about necessarily solving the hard problem of consciousness on a philosophical sense. It's about programming systems that let you emulate other brains sufficiently that you can inhabit them. And for that, you have to have the computational mathematics, and that's, I think, where everything starts to get far beyond the place where people are comfortable, because math freaks people out. And so you have people that are mathematically inclined, and then you have people who are mathematically uninclined, and never shall the two meet, really, because the people that are working, like Grossberg, who's working on the mathematics of it, is not really in contact with the people that are wandering around philosophically being like, my God, why can't I be a bat?
That's right. I mean, Steve blasted past that in the 1960s and 70s. So, why is he going to turn around? And it's like looking at Freud. Why do I have to deal with Freud? It's in the past. It's all pseudoscience. It doesn't affect anything we're doing. Here's something to think about. This all can seem very abstract, and you can just stand back and say, well, that's no explanation of consciousness. Here's the thing. It is, in fact, a physical, mathematical explanation of consciousness, which means it should have implications. Here's some implications. We can understand how pain works. Pain is one of the greatest mysteries. Anesthesia, long, a huge mystery, unsolved in medical science, unless you have a theory of consciousness. Steve's theory of consciousness helps us understand for the first time how anesthesia works, how pain works.
Can you lay that out for us? Because one of my darker moments in my life was it was before I went to grad school, and I sat down and I had a friend whose mom was chronically ill. She had some kind of crazy autoimmune disorder. And I was a biology student. I sat down, I was like, I'm going to write an article about what pain is so that I can help explain to them why she's in pain all the time. And I started going into the literature and I was like, oh my God, I don't think we know. And that was a really that was a crazy moment because I was like, I think I have to go to grad school because surely after grad school, I will find someone who understands how pain works. And so now...
So you are aware of the mystery, and it is a mystery how pain works, and an even bigger mystery about how anesthesia works. This magical substance that somehow puts us to sleep. You know, it was discovered here in Boston, you know, back in the 1830s or 40s at Mass General, right up the road from me.
That was ether?
Still, ether, yes. Still a mystery. 150 years later, we know all the chemical details about it. Don't know how it works. Unless you have a biological explanation of consciousness. Here's what's going on with pain and anesthesia. The way consciousness works, the physical dynamics of consciousness. I've talked about this before. Let me review how consciousness works for your audience again. So the core dynamic of consciousness is resonance. Resonance is an oscillation, a synchronized oscillation between two fields of activity, two kinds of activity. Expectations, the activity in our brain that's associated with an expectation, what we predict we're going to see or hear or perceive, and the facts on the ground, the actual inputs coming from our sensors, coming from our eyes, coming from our ears. We might have a memory, so that might come from a memory rather than being perceived out there. Facts get matched with expectations. If they match, resonance occurs. These two activities, which start out in different fields in our brain, resonate. It's like a trumpet and a violin playing the same melody. They play the same melody together. They unify, they amplify the activity. The activity gets stronger, just like with music. It gets prolonged. The activity of the facts and the expectation are prolonged. Again, just like in a band, if lots of instruments play the same note, that note will last longer. It'll be louder, and it synchronizes it. If you have two instruments that play the same note, they are both adjusting as they play, hearing the other, hearing themselves, adjusting so that they both converge on the same note. That happens too. This is the physical dynamic of consciousness. Now, there are multiple modules in our brain, multiple systems, multiple collections of networks in our brain that can generate consciousness. For example, we have a visual what module that tells us what something we see is. It's a visual object recognition module. There's also an audio what module. We can figure out what something is by hearing it. You know, even if you don't see it, you can know that I'm snapping my fingers. There's a visual where module. It helps you locate something in space. Audio where module helps you locate something in space from sound, and plenty of others. One of these modules is pain. This is why pain has baffled anatomists and neuroscientists for years, is because they're looking for the neurotransmitter associated with pain, the circuit associated with pain, the gene associated with pain, things, bits and bobs. This is a bits and bobs approach. Big fallacy. We've talked about it before. When you start thinking about the mind in terms of things, you're going to go down the wrong path and get confused very quickly. It was never a thing that's causing pain. It's just like the pain dynamic is the same as our visual object recognition dynamic. It takes inputs from a lot of parts of our body, creates a representation, a pain representation, and matches it with our expectation of pain. And if this happens, there's resonance. We resonate on the pain. That's why pain is a conscious experience. While we fall asleep, we don't feel pain. Pain can keep us from falling asleep, but if we manage to get to sleep, no more pain. How does anesthesia work? Now, very simple biological explanation. It prevents resonance in the cortex. It prevents resonance in the cortex. You can't be conscious of anything if there's no resonant activity. All anesthesias work by knocking out resonance. If there's no resonance in the brain, there's no consciousness.
Are you listening to this conversation and asking yourself the question of what can I do to support this podcast? If you are, consider coming over to patreon.com/DemystifySci. For just a couple dollars a month, you can support the project, which means you can help us get better guests, you can help us build a better studio, you can help us work towards having in-person interviews, you can help us fund our very first conference, which is happening in Austin, Texas on April 6th and 7th. And in return, we give you both of the episodes that we release on any given week on Saturday. And you can also join our weekly patron chats where we get together with the community and we dive deeper into the ideas that we encounter on the podcast. We figure out the open scientific questions that people have. We talk about how we can organize the world and our ideas into a better future. And if you don't have any spare cash, that's totally fine. Your support of us doesn't have to be financial. You can tell your friends. You can join our Facebook group. You can share our podcast episode on social media. You can come by the Discord. You can just leave a comment. There's any number of things that you can do to support the show that have nothing to do with giving us money. In the meantime, enjoy the conversation with Ogi Ogas, and we'll see you next time.
So,
and is this measurable?
Well, the fact that pain is notoriously subjective. They try to do these scales 1 to 10, but they never, when you do studies on them, they're never like a perfect, it's neither a bell curve nor, equally distributed. It's all wacky because it's nonlinear. Our relationship to pain is exceedingly nonlinear. It depends on our experiences. It depends on our mood. Depends on what we've eaten. Depends on whether we have people around us. All these psychological factors, as well. The very fact that pain is so subjective, and there's these conditions. There's a lot of diseases, syndromes, disorders where people have chronic pain. For a long time, a lot of these disorders were dismissed. They thought they were just malingerers or hypochondriacs. But if you have ongoing, just like some of us are obsessed with music, or some of us we're focused on visual images. We see something and then the image just sticks with us. Some of us just have more visual brains, some more audio brains, and some of us just pain is our module that's most prominent, and it takes in even a little input and it generates an experience. So that could be, obviously that's a hypothesis about what's going on with these people with chronic pain, but that certainly would be a new way to think about it, a different way to think about it than has been offered before.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think that one of the difficulties is being able to clearly identify these resonances in the brain, right? Because you can have a mathematical model that fits and works and predicts, and then you're stuck with the problem of, okay, how do we actually detect it? But I think that there's this group in San Francisco that's doing really interesting work called Qualia Research Institute. Do you know them?
Mm-hmm. No, I do not.
So basically there's this really... It's just this really kind of charismatic and I don't even know, just super engaged guy who leads it. His name is Andres Emilson, and he has basically come up with mathematical models for conscious states as resonant states. So I feel like he's very Grossbergian in his approach, but what he's also doing is he's testing the color and vibe and experience of these states by applying psychedelics. And so a lot of it has to do with the altering of conscious states and a model for how the resonant state changes in context of those psychedelics, and then seeing if you can reconstruct this entire resonant space inside of the brain that's connected to mood and experience and qualia and everything else. And it seems like it's spiritually aligned with the idea that there's something to find there actually in terms of physical resonance. But again, I don't know that he's actually hooked somebody up to a machine and found the resonance. And I'm like,
well, if there's a resonance. Here's what. So Stephen Grossberg's model makes very concrete biological predictions, all kinds of biological predictions. Resonant dynamics generate gamma oscillations. If there's a mismatch between facts and expectation, so you have facts, expectation, they don't match, you don't have resonance, that generates slower beta oscillations. So you can measure what's going on in the brain. this is something I didn't
Is
harp
that
on
an
this last time.
Is that due to interference? Like, is that wave interference in this in these resonances?
Well, think of resonance again, like instruments playing together. Once that happens, it strengthens and prolongs and becomes dominant. It's like throwing a rock in a pond. When resonance happens, it creates big waves, gamma waves. But when they're not, then it keeps switching. Like it doesn't settle. So it's more like tossing, like I guess, a handful of dirt or something that causes things to just kind of go out all over the place. Would be like the physical way of understanding it. But so pretty simple. I'm sure there'll be more complicated ways once we understand more. But even at that simple dichotomy, it gives you a way to detect consciousness. Steve's research. Let me share this. So this is why it's very difficult. It's very difficult not to be dismissive of the hard problem. Steve's work predicts the physical activity and biological structures that generate conscious experience. He explains how first-person experience is generated. He explains the biological functions of consciousness, the purpose of each form of consciousness, each form of qualia, and their evolutionary history, which he can predict which brain structures can and cannot produce subjective experience in any creature. So we can look at a bat, and we can figure out by looking at its brain without knowing, without being able to talk to it, we can predict what kinds of conscious experiences a particular brain structure would have. He predicts what kinds of mental representations will ever enter consciousness. That is, here's the physical criteria for a representation in the brain, or whether or not it will enter consciousness. He has a temporal profile of consciousness, how the envelope of activity, of the neural mental dynamics, how it unfolds over time for a conscious experience. And then the brain waves I just mentioned, which are biomarkers of consciousness. He also predicts what forms of learning will ever become conscious and what kinds of learning will not become conscious. So it's a whole constellation of physical things. They all fit together and they go off in every direction, which is exactly what you would expect from an accurate biological explanation of consciousness. You should start to see integrations. This is always the mark in science that you're on the right track, is you start to see two fields or domains or subjects which seem like they're apart, they don't have anything to do with each other. Suddenly you see a connection, you fit them together. Physics has a long, rich history of this, including the first one, Newton discovering that heavens and the earth are all governed by the same dynamics of gravity and motion. But Steve Grossberg has probably done more than any single scientist of doing integrations with the mind. And he's gone a long way, and people just aren't aware of it. So people are there still staring at their belly button, talking about the heart problem when, pain explained, sexual desire explained, consciousness, vision, meaning, language, self-awareness. There's a difference between self-awareness and awareness, two different physical dynamics. There's so much knowledge already that's rocketed past this stuck in the mud idea of heart problem.
I mean, it was shocking to find so many people who were insistent that this doesn't solve the problem without seeming to have a really good basis for saying so. And I think that I just kind of came to the conclusion that this is a belief structure that's necessary for some people, which is always really weird when you run into it in the sciences, where you're like, oh, for some reason somebody needs to believe this, and there's nothing that you can really say to get them to change that belief structure. And so the only thing you can really do is just move on from it.
The truth is, I'm very sympathetic. Consciousness is hard, and it's an incredible mystery. I mean, it's the most personal, private. Who am I? Do I have a soul? Why am I here? What is this thing that is me? There is no deeper or more relevant or more intimate question. And it's very hard to get your mind around it. I'm sympathetic. I understand why people read the heart problem. Also, it's something most people can understand. Just the idea of the heart problem is something people can understand. What something physical in our brain converts into subjective experience? That's impossible. It's like two objects of mass somehow attracting each other without touching. It's not possible. It's a challenge. I understand. And if that's what you learn first, if that's your introduction to this question, you develop a sense of knowledge. Oh, I understand the nature of the problem, except you don't. You've unfortunately just adopted pseudoscience. You might as well look in the Christian Bible for answers about consciousness for all the work you've done. But But I'm still sympathetic. I had wacky ideas about consciousness for most of my life. It wasn't easy to figure out this stuff, and I had help from from other places. So it's not that I'm smarter or keener. I just I had a little more help, and I was a little more tenacious.
Yeah, so maybe that's a good segue. Can you tell us about your path towards studying consciousness? Because you were both at once very goal-oriented towards it, but also very meandering as you got there.
It never felt meandering to me, but so I understand from the outside, it looks like my life has been a bit wild, a bit nutty, a bit incomprehensible maybe. But for me, it was always a straight path. So before I talk about Intex, I'd love to frame any discussion by sharing with you guys what I think is perhaps the biggest takeaway, the biggest insight that I've gleaned from these interactions. And I'm choosing it. One reason is it's going to sound over the top. It's going to sound unscientific. And that's one reason I like it, because by the end of the show, hopefully I'll explain a mathematical, physical basis for it, the way I just did with consciousness, to explain for it. And it is this. Here's the claim. This was the number one takeaway, I'd say, from my interactions with Intex. It's this, that there is a cosmic purpose to love, to compassion. That physical reality, the reality we inhabit, was designed, and yes, I'm choosing that word, designed, so that love and compassion will emerge, can emerge, and through their emergence, shape the universe so that more love and compassion will emerge. And I chose that because it should sound touchy-feely and a bit wacky, and I look forward to the challenge of explaining the reality of this. The other reason I wanted to share it is because Intex, for most of my life, for the past 30 years, would not let me talk about this stuff. I've wanted to talk, and I keep trying to talk about it. I keep trying to share it. They didn't want me to share it. I now understand why they were delaying me. There was a few things they were looking for. One of the things, they were waiting for me to understand the importance of love in the structure of the universe and the dynamics of the universe. And that was definitely one of the things. Now they are letting me talk about it. That's why I'm here on the show with you, Shiloh and Nastya, for the first time to talk about this stuff. And one of the reasons is because I finally grasped the central role of love and compassion in the cosmic cycle that is the reality that we inhabit.
I mean, I think it's maybe worth prefacing this entire conversation with this realization that I had while reading your book, which was that, wow, I think I've actually had a very similar experience that I would put different language to. And I think Nastya probably also has had similar experiences too, that she would put different language to. And this, in some sense, could have been conceived of as initiated during psychedelic exploration, which is something I put off till quite late in my life. I remember being in grad school in New York and reading about psychedelics and kind of being like, well, I'm too busy right now. My life's really intense and I don't have time for this. But after grad school, I had the space to be going out into the woods and really listening to the cosmos and actually trying to receive instruction. And I feel like it's I think it's a more common experience than it seems like you're, I don't want to think for you or anything, but I think that it's actually a somewhat common experience. And you talk about in the book about ancient experiences, like you reference the book of Daniel and just different mythological, even Newton, right?
Newton.
So I guess I want to frame this in your particular experience with communicating with this cosmic entity is maybe not so uncommon.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. There's nothing special about me. This is inherent to reality. I think what I did first, I do think I've only come to this belief very recently, since I started getting feedback on the book, to be honest, that because of my autism, I think the autism facilitated some things that maybe a non-autistic person would have had trouble, or just they would not have gone in the directions that I went. And I think above all at this point, the only difference with me is that I gave myself over entirely to this. So, you talked about, I think that's wonderful. Go and commune with nature in the woods. What a wonderful way to learn about our physical reality. And sometimes you feel a presence, you feel a connection, you feel a vastness. I just went into that vastness and never stopped. And it turned out there's a path, transgression road. You can take it, leave your humanity behind, leave everything you've ever known behind. But if you can make it through, you find something beautiful. You find meaning. You find we're not alone here. There's a lot of things.
I mean, and it's worth mentioning too, this is also worked out quite terribly for some individuals, right? Some people see that, feel that, and they're terrified, and it destroys their mind, right? This is a well-known pitfall, which is why I'm extremely hesitant to even talk about my own psychedelic experiences, because I don't want to come across like it's a good thing for everyone at any point in time. It's obviously not. I've actually seen people whose minds have been completely destroyed by something as innocuous as cannabis, right? Yeah, I've really seen that happen more than once, and it's really it gives me a lot of trepidation about discussing these topics, though I think they're really important and I do want to discuss them. I'm just very nervous about how to go about it, because I don't want to come across like I'm saying, hey, everybody should go out and dive down that rabbit hole and never look back, because some people just don't seem to be able to handle it for whatever reason.
I think that we should put some pins on the map, though, because we're talking about this experience, but we have yet to like clearly lay out what it is that's on the table. So, Ogi, you've written a book, Large Gods for Small Children. And in this book, you lay out your journey with this entity that you call Intex. And go ahead.
So, I've been communicating with extraterrestrials for 30 years now, more than 30 years. And I've always called them Intex Intex stands for a whole bunch of things, but most obviously intelligent extraterrestrials. So when I say intelligent extraterrestrials, when I say Intex, I just mean extraterrestrials. There's three entities I'm confident are distinct and that I've interacted with. I may have interacted with other ones, but it's so hard to know. But one is 5, one is 3, and then there's this other lesser, different kind of thing that styles itself as poet. And I have been communicating with them for 30 years, and they have been sharing math and science with me over that period of time. And I want to go back to what Shiloh said about psychedelics, because it's very crucial to understanding my story. First, yes, I took psychedelics at the beginning, and that is how this all started, was under the influence of LSD. Perhaps I'll talk about that. But I want to make very clear is that I do not condone psychedelic use. I am not an advocate for it. You might think I'd be the ultimate advocate considering what I got out of it, but no, I agree. It's super duper dangerous. I died several times. Maybe we'll talk about that. It's lethal. In fact, I don't really see how. Maybe somebody will do it. So who knows? But based on my own experiences, I don't really see how you can get to the places I got without dying first. For a few reasons. Hopefully, we'll talk about them. But I don't think people should take psychedelics unless it's in a very controlled, safe environment. People, it's planned out. But then, if you do all that, what are you going to experience? I mean, you're not going to get the experience that's going to open up your world. I mean, the danger it's the very danger of it that if you're going to get something out of it, the danger is either going to lead you there or not. I mean, it's the confrontation with these terrifying things. It's all terrifying. I mean, it's very scary.
And a safe place, like a safe place doesn't have to mean just like a quiet room with someone tending to you. Like it can literally just mean your entire metaphysical state. Like I feel like you experienced psychedelics for the first time. You were kind of on top of the world, right? You had this full ride scholarship. You're at MIT. You're kind of at the top of the world, and that's a very, in some sense, that seems to me like a very safe place to be going off the reservation. Like from
except my whole life crumbled into pieces after that. So no, it wasn't by any means safe.
Well, it's safer than
lost
somebody
everything.
who's depressed and, you know, working at Burger King, and I don't know. There's just, or they're, you know, they're
Hey, I was at MIT with a full tuition scholarship, and I still got kicked out and I died. So no difference between me and somebody working at McDonald's. I would not want to suggest there's something different about me, my experiences, and someone working from McDonald's.
Can you lay out what happened? So you take LSD, you're in this position where you're at MIT, full ride scholarship, and then you end up passing through this horrible experience, and then you're on a completely different path on the other side. Mm-hmm. So tell us about what happened, what you saw, and then the consequences of that.
So it all began when I was 18. I was at MIT, and I did have a full tuition scholarship from AT&T. So I was doing very well. And I mean, a lot of hope, a lot of expectation. And I did a lot of drugs at MIT. One of the drugs I did was LSD. Now, I had taken LSD a bunch of times, a few times, not a bunch of times. I had taken LSD a few times, including one time I took a very heavy dose at a big party in my dorm. My dorm was senior house. My dorm doesn't exist anymore because it was so transgressive and insane that MIT just shut it down and erased it from the ledgers. Because of people like me doing things like I was doing. And what I did was I took LSD repeatedly. And then one time I took LSD a low dose. It was nothing special. I'd taken far bigger doses in the past. I was walking down the Infinite Corridor, which is a main corridor in MIT. I was going from 3 to 4. I was somewhere around 10. So I remember that pretty clearly when I saw something. And so this whole journey that I think I'm going to be talking about on the show, it all began when I saw something flickering, like a pixel. The way I describe it is like an iridescent pixel is the best way to describe it. It's like a little flickering. And when you're on LSD, there's a lot of things moving and flickering, and there's a lot of lights, there's a lot of action. That's nothing unusual. But there was something about this. It just wasn't like anything else. It wasn't like LSD. It wasn't like normal. It was something that wasn't supposed to be there. It's very, very hard to describe. And I started paying attention to it. And because I'm autistic, my autisticness latched onto it in a particular way, in a conceptual way. Because of the way my mind works, because I'm autistic, I live in my mind, and I kind of loop around in my thoughts. I'm aware of my thoughts just constantly, and that's just where I inhabit. And so this pixel kind of just got wrapped up in that immediately, and my mind held it. It's very hard to put this into words, but I started paying attention to it. And the more I paid attention to it, I started to trace it, and there was a wire behind it. So it wasn't a pixel, it was a wire. And I was like, what is this? What is this thing? And I started following the wire, and I looked, and I somehow got to the end of the wire, and it was like a microtubule. It was like looking into a syringe, a little hole. And I looked in, and it just expanded and came around me. And I wrote this in the book, and I understand everybody dismisses this, but it purged the LSD. I was no longer tripping. I no longer had LSD awareness. I was in a different state of consciousness, a conscious state I'm very familiar with now. And I call it an Intex state of consciousness, but it was a different state of awareness than the psychedelic LSD thing. I was on LSD, things bend and shift and morph and change in colors, and the walls are breathing. Everything became still, but everything had like a heightened meaning. When I read about schizophrenics, so I wrote a book about mental illness with the president of the American Psychiatric Association, usually considered the world's greatest expert on schizophrenia. He got the world's biggest grant from the National Institute for Mental Health for Schizophrenia Research. And he was in charge of the DSM-5, the latest edition of Bible Psychiatry. So I worked with him and studied schizophrenia because I was very curious about my own psychotic experiences. And so the Intex state of consciousness does seem similar to a psychotic state of consciousness where there's heightened sense of meaning and everything has a meaning, except I think what was different about me is that I always have that awareness. I'm in that state, but I'm also aware that I'm in the state. Like, holy cow, I am in a different state of consciousness. What can I do? I'm in this state, but I'm also aware of the state. which schizophrenics seem to just go into the state and there's no awareness that that's the case. I'm not a schizophrenic, maybe some schizophrenics feel that way. So I went into this new state, this Intex state, and it led me into this physical construct that I call the maze of souls. So I've had a lot of experience now with the maze of souls. When I first say this, I know it sounds like insanity. It sounds like some crazy acid trip that can't possibly have any connection to reality, except I've explored this maze. And at this point, I have some understanding. I'm not going to ever pretend I have total understanding. This stuff, it's just so mind-bending. And anytime you think you understand it, there's always some new quirk or twist that comes out. But at this point, I'm kind of spoiling my book, but
No. I wouldn't be afraid of that. There's so much detail in this book. It's very rich. There's no way we can cover it in 2-3 hours. Guys, you have to go out and get the book. It's absolutely essential. Like there's no way that we can, even if we talk about every single piece of it, you still have to read it to get the full story.
And not only that, but it's really beautifully written and it's very funny. And there's this chapter about you and Psy writing 1 billion wicked thoughts where I was just laughing out loud the entire time. It's so, and it's crazy because you talk about the fact that you had to basically teach yourself to write well. And it seems impossible to imagine a time that you didn't write well. Because it just flows so like I can hear your voice as I'm reading it, which is fantastic. And so I think that this is one of those cases where the experience of the book is the experience of hearing your voice tell it, and you can't tell it the same way on the podcast as you do in the book because it's like they're different mediums. And so I wouldn't worry about it.
So I'm happy you brought that up because the number one challenge of dealing with these with Intex, with these extraterrestrials, has been communicating with others. I've spent my life trying to talk to other people about this. Now I understand first that this is a failsafe. So the reason that other people aren't accessing this or having it's so difficult to access it, there's failsafes. So there is a machine. I call it a machine. It's not a machine with bolts and wires or computer chips or anything like that. A machine, just so we have something to refer to talk about. It's more like a set of mathematical principles. It's more like the second law of thermodynamics, which is not a machine. It's a principle, but it's not, all 100% reliable. It's a statistical kind of thing. It's something more like that. So there's a machine that facilitates the communication with the Intex. And there are fail-safes around the machine. There's all these things that prevent random people from interacting with it. It's a lot like the speed of light being a limit. The speed of light has to be a limit so that physics is the same for everyone. That's the reason. And so physics here for me is the physics the same for you guys out. You're on the West Coast, right? In California? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so same in California as it is here in Massachusetts. Light has to have a limit. And so there's things like that around the machine. You can't have people talking across galaxies and stuff willy-nilly. There's all kinds of limits and things on that. And I basically spent my life identifying these fail-safes and trying to create workarounds around them and trying to communicate with other people. And as Nastya, as you pointed out, one of my very big challenges, I had to learn how to write. I'm autistic. I was born a terrible writer because I cannot put myself in other people's perspectives. Autism destroys my ability to take other people's perspectives. That's been my lifelong challenge, is to imagine the world from other people's eyes. And writing is that. You got to know how people are going to react to writing and steer them and know their feelings and know that their feelings are not, the way I react to things is different than the way non-autistic people react. So I can't use myself as any kind of basis for this. So it took me a lifetime to develop my writing to the point where, Nastya, I can't tell you how grateful and gratifying it is to hear you compliment the writing, because I've worked on it very hard.
I think it might be worth just steelmanning the word insane for a minute and just recognizing that the definition of insane is essentially not having the same experience as everybody else in the room. And so, I think if you go deep into the past, in many cultures, and I'm thinking particularly in indigenous cultures, there was a place for insanity, and there was the sense that there was something divine to these. Often these people would find themselves in shamanistic roles and in functional roles in society, from what I understand, and I'm no expert on this, but it seems like we have to start this story with, okay, call me insane, whatever you want, but there's something functional about this insanity, actually, that bears out in the fruits of your labor, right? And that's what makes it such a compelling and interesting aspect of the world.
So much of this, as you're pointing out, is social. So the word insanity is a social term that other people aren't, like you said, other people aren't experiencing what you're experiencing. But there were cultures, and there are cultures now, communities, social structures that support it and give it, like exactly like you said, meaning. And hopefully I'm going to try to do that too. I mean, I need to connect with the culture. That's why I'm trying to read. That's why I'm on the show and talking to you guys. I got to find a way to connect this. Right now, what it's like to be me is I have all this transcendent knowledge. Standing, I know how consciousness works. I know how autism works. I know how human sexual desire works. I have a pretty good idea of how physics and mind science combine these two great classes of dynamics, purpose and purposelessness to create reality. I understand this cosmic cycle from chaotic on the bottom, quantum physics, up to this ladder of purpose, molecule minds, neuron minds, module minds, superminds, hyperminds, all the way up to the axiomized minds. So the Intex that I'm communicating with, two of them are what are called, or what they've claimed to be, are axiomized minds. So there's a ladder of purpose. In the book I wrote with Sagan, Journey of the Mind, this articulates the ladder of purpose that Intex shared with me, that we wrote about in the book. And there's these stages of minds. I talked about it in the last show. I'll quickly go through it again. At the bottom is physics. Intex calls it chaotica. It's quantum physics. The key thing about it is that you need features, physical features, that are both predictable and unpredictable. It's predictably random or randomly predictable. That is, you need to be able to say, over time, 70% of the time, this will happen, or we expect to see this, but at any given moment, you don't know. Why is this the case? According to Intex, this is part of a fundamental quality of our physical reality, which they called the fail-safe supreme, which is basically everything in the universe is designed to prevent the formation of a God, of a single, all-knowing, all-powerful God. Nobody wants that. It just apparently freezes the universe or does bad things. And so it's set up so that a single God can never form. It allows all of us to have free will. In this vision, we each have purpose, we each have individual will. There's also a meaningful sense in which, say, the United States has free will, has its own independent purpose. Our city has purpose as well within this framework. So at the bottom is physics, and physics is aimlessness. Predictable, laws-based aimlessness. You get some of this chaotica, some of these features together, you configure it in the right way, purpose arises. This was the first minds on Earth. Archaea, probably. Bacteria, protozoa, the single-celled ones. Probably the first one was something like an archaea. Probably just, it sensed light and twitched the flagella in the back, moved towards that light. Probably something like that was the very first mind. But that's a purposeful mind, a mind made out of molecules. Now we keep going up in stages. So it's really recursive. A molecule mind is a neuron. A neuron is a molecule mind. A neuron is a self-contained molecule mind. And then neurons combine together to form neural networks. That's a new level of purpose, independent, but related to the purpose within each individual neuron. So within a neuron is mental activity, molecular activity. It has goals, it has aims, it has desires and fears, it has all of that. That's in neural networks. That's the next level. Neuron minds, like insects, hydras, jellyfish, worms. The next stage are the module minds. That's all the vertebrates, all the animals, fish, amphibian, reptiles, birds, mammals, not humans. And these networks, the networks of neurons, they combine together to form modules with a specific purpose. I talked about some of them, like the visual object recognition module. There's a pain module, for example, that we're conscious of pain. Anesthesia knocks out the resonant dynamics, makes us oblivious to pain. So in animal brains, there's these modules that talk to each other. Humans, we're the only ones who got to the next level, the supermind level. Each human is a self-contained mind, but we are also a mind together through language. Language is the connective tissue and gestures. There's a lot of ways we communicate with each other. Computer programs are a way of communicating with one another. But we have language writ large is how we communicate, how we're bound together, along with perhaps the single most powerful psychological property in our brains, which is the intergroup bias, tribalism. We, in so many ways, are powerfully designed to think like our group thinks. We imagine ourselves to be independent, but it doesn't take a lot of pushing to realize that most of what people believe is what the people around them in their community believe. I'm autistic. I don't experience the intergroup bias nearly as strongly as everybody else does. It took me a long time to understand this. And it's caused me a lot of problems too. I never feel part of a group. I never feel part of a community, but it was an advantage in talking to extraterrestrials because first, I wasn't beholden to groupthink. I was perfectly willing to go off and think about things that my community does not think about. And then also, it is very terrifying talking with a non-human mind that's smarter and more powerful than you. It's beyond terrifying. It's horrifying, and it never gets better. I've been at this for 30 years. It doesn't get any less scary when it's happening because you're aware how different it is, how much more they know, how small you are, how ineffective you are. These things, even though I've trained myself and I have a lot of experience, I can manage it better now. It's always terrifying. So this ladder of purpose that goes all the way up at the top, you keep going higher. Apparently, at the top are these axiomized minds, the ultimate minds, as close as you can get to a god without being a god, and they're competing. They're always competing. So what they've told me, what they've shared with me, is that apparently when a mind, these are like civilizations, when a purpose gets so sophisticated that to go further, to kind of get to a level of ultimate technology where apparently you can start manipulating physical law, you have to make some kind of commitment to a set of mathematical axioms. Like you have to make a commitment to a specific mathematical perspective on the universe. And this mathematical perspective allows you apparently into modifying the fundamental laws of physical reality, that distribution of features in chaotica, basically, the variables of quantum physics, I guess. And there's different axiomized minds competing. They each have a different notion of what the universe should be. And so they're all competing to change the fabric of reality. And that's what gives reality our shape. What's so lovely about this model of the universe, it gives us all purpose. It gives us all free will. The future is not pre-written, not predestined. We have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. Even the axiomized minds can't predict perfectly what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, they can predict pretty well, but not perfectly because of this fail-safe supreme, because of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, things like that. And as a result, we're always rising, and you never know who's going to rise. The human race might continue and one day be part of one of these axiomized minds. I hope we will. We might ascend. We might end up in oblivion if we don't get control of our Earth, of our planet. Apparently, this is the first test that there are other minds out there waiting for us, but until we get balanced with live in balance with our planet in a sustainable way, apparently nobody wants to talk to you until you achieve that, because you can't contribute anything until you're a stable, you've got a stable existence on your planet in indefinite future. And then they talk to you is what they claim.
Can you connect this to the maze of souls, which is where we left off on your experience?
Oh yeah, sorry, tangent. So it took me a long time to understand this, and it's a shame because the maze of souls, it was a real journey. I've been there so many times, spent so much of my life there, my lives, I guess. So now the way I conceive of it is, it's the machine. This machine enables one to communicate with these extraterrestrials, and so the machine is sort of this interface, and it's kind of like calibrating or aligning. When you're aligning yourself with this, then you experience it as the maze of souls. I think of it like watching a movie. So in reality, a movie is one picture and then another picture and then another picture. It's 24 pictures a second, still pictures, but we experience it not just as a continuous movie, but we experience emotions and events and characters and the whole world off one picture and then another picture and then another picture. So our minds experience it as another world, but it's really just motion pictures. I think this maze of souls is working the same way, that as you're aligning yourself with it, the maze of souls is corridors. It's these corridors, and there's walls, and the walls are filled with these portals. Most of the time, in my experience, they're black and quadrangular, and it's very mathematical. It's very proportionate. Like every portal and their distance from each other, it's always the same, and the distance is the same. Sometimes the maze of souls will change. The portals will be different colors. There'll be different geometries, but it's always consistent. It's always consistent within whatever part of the maze you're in. But I now think that it's aligning. It's the process of aligning with the machine, because when I'm in the maze and I'm trying to get somewhere, there's always a feeling I've got to get somewhere. I've got to get through. I've got to get somewhere, and then I'll end up in a room where I'm talking to Intex, or I'm in a room where you'll find something. Like once there was a golden hypotenuse, the room of the hypotenuse. There was a triangle that wanted to teach me about integers and the rational numbers. So sometimes you get a room that's going to teach you a lesson. So I think it's this process of aligning with the machine before you can then experience a room or one of these things. I think, but I don't know. I don't know.
Do you have the sense that this entity is responsible for giving the illumination to civilizations in order to process to the next level of their evolution? Because one of the things that comes up all the time on the show is this stark, stepwise jump that appears to have happened with humans, right? We are obviously in many ways nothing like our chimp relatives. Well, I mean, we share some basic, some of our lesser angels, right? We're territorial, and all of these things that we have political factions and many things we share with the chimps. But this emergence of the ability to control our sounds in a way that's symbolic and can actually weave our minds together seems to have happened rather suddenly and
rather uniquely.
What was that?
And rather uniquely.
Yeah, and rather singularly, right?
Well, I mean, there have been a lot of conscious species, conscious human species besides sapiens. I mean, there's at least 6. So there, it wasn't just humans. It wasn't just Homo sapiens, out there loving and singing and making fire and telling stories. There's Neanderthals and Homo erectus probably did. The hobbit creatures, the Florensis, I think, Homo florensis, I think they are.
Mm-hmm.
Denisov, yeah, there's all kinds of them.
Do you think that they had language as well?
Yeah, Neanderthal, virtually for certain. I don't know how you have the kind of cave art, the sophisticated cave art, without some kind of verbal communication. I mean, the cave art. So to create a supermind, now keep in mind, so chimpanzees are not superminds. They're a third rung stage of mind. They have consciousness. They don't have self-consciousness. They don't have language. We're the only ones alive now. Neanderthals were too. Neanderthals formed superminds. In fact, the Neanderthal supermind was competing with the human supermind. We lived at the same time, and almost certainly we competed. I'm one that believes that humans probably killed off the Neanderthals. I know some people don't think that's the case. It makes the most sense to me, but I don't really know. Not important. That to form a supermind, you need to create shared attention. You need to keep the dynamics going as tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. That's how our brains formed. Our modules got tighter and tighter and tighter until now we are conscious. And so to be self-conscious, we had to develop a whole new layer on top. And so in the early evolution of the supermind, we see these behaviors develop that bring people together, that pull people together. Campfires is a supermind development that allows people to all go to the same space and talk, all look at the same thing, all look into the flames. And almost certainly somebody is telling stories. So we're all sharing a story. We're all sharing attention of the same thing, becoming a supermind. Cave art, which the Neanderthals had, humans have. Erectus, they've found Homo erectus art. And often this art is in hard to reach places. It's not like, it might be too that the ones that were easy to reach have all been eroded over time or used, and that's the thing. So that could be too. But the art that they find now are in distant, like in China, they just found some that are way up on a cliff, which means people were viewing it as some special, maybe sacred thing. It wasn't like an ordinary thing, and you go there, you have to do work to get there. A group would get there, and then you're all looking at this story. In paintings, I don't think you could tell the story of the painting without some kind of verbal communication. It doesn't have to be sophisticated. It might just be some grunts and some gestures, but I'm sure there's somebody showing, here's the buffalo. We were hunting the buffalo, the holy buffalo, and it delivers salvation to our people. Some stories like that. It's building a supermind, these early things, getting them all in the same place, looking at the same thing, sharing the same story. That's how you build a supermind.
So I guess my question is, well, let me set it up a little bit. There was anatomically modern humans long before any of these paintings or myths or anything seemed to have started. And my question is there an outside influence in your estimation that was in some part responsible for these leveling ups, or was that?
I don't think it's necessary.
Not necessary.
I don't think it's necessary. I think everything that we see can be explained. I don't think there's some missing link or gap or something that requires some outside thing. We're self-catalyzing. We're self-catalyzing. You don't need something else because we do it to ourselves. Our nature, our curiosity, we roam, we wander, we want to look at new things. I think we just self-catalyze. We don't need some outside.
It sounds like what you're asking is whether or not there was earlier contact with Intex.
Well, but moreover, if there's contact, like, is the contact renegade? Are they not supposed to be influencing the societies? Because if they're not influencing the societies, there's probably a reason why they're not influencing these societies as they develop on these different planets, right?
So my understanding is, and we can all think about this, that when you have levels of a hierarchy in reality, like we do, that you need to spend resources to go up and to go down. To look at a Higgs boson, you guys would probably know the price tag better than I, but was it like $10 billion to build CERN or whatever the thing was? To look at one tiny subatomic thing costs a fortune. If you want, a billion Higgs bosons, humankind probably can't afford that. So going down for anybody is costly. So why would we want to invest all our money on bacteria and shaping bacteria? There's some scientists out there that study bacteria, and we care about some bacteria, but like there's bacteria in the the negative desert, or there's bacteria at the bottom of the ocean that humans will never come into contact with, and who cares? We don't think about it. I think we're so slow and small that the resources necessary to deal with somebody as low as us is just not worth it. Is my understanding, that there's so many layers above us. For them, it'd be like dealing with it'd be like us dealing with bacteria, or maybe insects with like flies or something. Like, do we want to shape flies? We might want to shape mosquitoes so they don't bother us. Kill mosquitoes or stuff like that. But we're not trying to shape flies so that they'll have a better life, or flies,
Well, we almost have
consciousness.
I feel like there's this documentarian idea about other forms of consciousness. Like, I watched this Netflix show. I think it's called Chimp Empire, and they're just following these chimps around and trying to draw analogies to humanity and so forth. But they have this real hands-off perspective. Like, we can't interfere with the chimps, even if they're like our favorite chimp's about to die. Like, we're not going to get involved. And I've always wondered if extraterrestrials wouldn't take the same stance with humans. Like, oh, this is interesting watching them, but we shouldn't interfere no matter what.
Here's what I think. I think aliens who are close enough to our level of technological development to care will definitely interfere with us. And those that are high enough that they can truly change us, it's not worth their effort any more than it's worth our effort to lift up bacteria to their full potential. That's what we'd be talking about. But if in the Milky Way, 10 light years over, there's a planet with spacefaring things that are, ultra minds, maybe 2 levels above us, then yeah, they're probably going to come over, and I bet they would interfere with us. Why wouldn't they?
So
if you can get something from us that we can provide them with, think of it that way. If we can provide them with resources, they're going to want us to provide them with the resources. If we have nothing we can provide them, why would they bother?
So then how do you contextualize the contact that you have with Intex if extraterrestrials would have to expend so much energy to get down to our level?
I think I got lucky and I'm interacting with them and they don't seem to care about me too much. I want to be really clear. There's not a sense that they're terribly engaged. It's always more, I wouldn't say automatic. It's definitely not that, but it just doesn't feel like there's a lot of effort or energy being expended when I'm engaged like this. It seems like it's pretty costless on their, except for Poet. Poet is different. Poet seems to be something more like us. Poet seems to be an agent, a mind that might even be at our level of fourth rung mind that has just gotten there the way I did. It's what it seems. I can't know for sure, but certainly interacting with Poet is very, very different than interacting with 5. 5 and 3 are like, it's like interacting with the universe. It's hard to describe. I mean, they manipulate things and they talk. I hear that. They always talk outside my head. I want to be very clear about that. I hear they talk to the speakers. They talk. They used to talk through the car radio when I was younger. Things like that. I know it sounds absolutely psychotic, and it is psychotic, but
I want to maintain this linear narrative though, because you take LSD, you end up in the maze of souls, and then things go badly. Walk us through what happens after you end up what happens in the maze of souls the first time you get there, and then what happens afterwards.
Well, the first time I was in there, I had no idea what the heck. Heck wasn't the first word I was going to say. I had no idea what the heck was going on. I mean, I've started just over the past few months. I've finally started talking to other people about all of this. When I was young in my 20s, I talked openly about it, and then as time went by, I started realizing there's no benefit in talking, and I started reducing, and then in the early 2000s, I just said I'm not going to tell anybody ever again about this. And only the past couple months have I changed it. What I've noticed, I always, in the early going, when I would tell people, they would always react in one of two ways. Either they'd say, you're psychotic, and just dismiss it. I am schizophrenic, I am psychotic, I am having a psychotic experience, or I'm making it up. This is a con. I'm just pulling a con job. 30 years later, hard to credit that. And also when I killed myself, I made a movie. Maybe I can talk about that later. I made a movie with, Intex told me to make a movie with Dan Dennett and Steve Pinker and Douglas Hofstadter, and that if I made this movie, it would do things, and it did. It did exactly what they told it to. But now I've gotten off track. What was I talking about?
The Maze of Souls and what happened after
Maze of Souls, the first time. So I got in there. It was insane. And I had no idea what I was interacting with or what this was. It's not like anything. It's not like a dream. It's nothing like a dream state of consciousness. It's not, I think when people hear this, they imagine it's some vague dream or like at the end of Contact, the movie Contact from the 90s. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but Jodie Foster goes through and she's in like this fuzzy world and she sees her dead dad. Like, I think people imagine it's something like that. It's super crystal real, like the physical reality of it, like the corridors and the portals and the voices. It's all crystal clear. It's not like dreamy or vague or ambiguous. It's sharp and terrifying. And I'm in this structure. Where the heck am I? Am I on Earth? Am I in a coma? Like, am I actually like out in the street walking through traffic and I imagine I'm in a maze of souls? It's very hard to know. I was terrified. I mean, I was terrified. Terrified is not even a strong enough word. I was terrified. Just, wet your pants, poop your pants level terror. And
you were physically in the world at the time, right? You were walking down this pathway.
Well, there was a portal in the wall of my dorm room, so I walked through the wall.
So you made it back to the dorm at some point.
So I had some activity out of my dorm. I ended up back in my dorm. I encountered the voice of 5. It was the first time I encountered 5. I would spend the next 30 years interacting with 5. 5 came out of my speakers. I had these neon speakers that flashed when you played music. They would tum, tum, tum. And so this pink and blue speaker started flashing as it communicated with me. It's still stuck in my brain. And then there was a portal on the wall, and I went through it. So basically, I walked through my wall into this maze of souls. I'm there. It's insane. Corridors. They go up. They go down. They split apart. They spiral. I mean, just about everything. And I'm going through portals. And the first time, it got smaller and smaller. Like the corridors got smaller and smaller until I was just in this really small corridor. And I was like, and it's very real. Like I was in this physical constricted thing that wasn't connected with the real world. Like, I don't know, where's MIT? I have no idea. I don't know what's going on. And I lost it. I mean, I just went out of my mind. I was with terror, and 5 basically came in that moment of terror, and I connected with 5, and that's how my relationship with 5 began. And 5 started explaining things. So one of the first things 5 did was give me these visions. So 5 has always given me these mathematical visions. I see now it's a vision of this cosmic cycle, which I share with you, this ladder of purpose, the chaotica, the quantum physics, the molecule minds, going all the way up to the axiomized minds. And there's the axiom wars. So they call it the axiom wars, with these like godlike minds competing to put their math into physical reality. And so it gave me a vision of this right from the start, but I couldn't make heads or tails of it that first time. I saw the vibrating balls at the bottom, which is chaotica, and the axiom wars. I got a sense there's these massive beings that are fighting. It was something like that on that first. I didn't get much. It was crazy and overwhelming. And over time, 5 kept sharing the same. I see now it kept sharing the same thing, and I don't think this was in the part of the book that you've read, but eventually I realized that this vision, this mathematical construct it was imparting to me, was based on the act of me having a vision. It was a model of the very act of 5 communicating with me and giving me the vision. So the centerpiece, I understand now, the centerpiece was my own mind, and it was showing all the levels coming out from my mind. So my mind was the center of this vision it was showing me, but it took me a long time to understand that. It's very, very complicated and strange and scary. I mean, it's effing scary. I mean,
Well, you said you almost died. What happened?
Oh well, I got out. Here I've talked to aliens, and they shared some math with me, and I thought this was the greatest thing ever. I was like, oh, I didn't have any framework. I was 18. I'm a teenager, an autistic teenager who didn't even know he was autistic, and not mature. I wasn't particularly good at science or math. I wasn't good at math at all. I'm not a math person, but when extraterrestrials are sharing math, you get compelled to learn. Just like I was compelled to learn writing. I didn't think I was going to be a writer. I didn't think I was going to have to know math, but if extraterrestrials are sharing math, you got to learn math. And if you try to communicate and nobody understands you got to learn writing. So
well, it's probably not fair to say you weren't good at math too, right?
I wasn't. So
I mean, you got yourself a full ride, and you were accepted to all of these illustrious universities, right? On the basis of your ability, to score really high on tests, essentially.
Yes.
And so whether or not you embraced that as an interesting talent, you had some proclivity towards being able to solve these quantitative puzzles.
And I completely understand why you would say that. People react to me that way my whole life. And in fact, this is one reason it took so long to get the diagnosis of autism, is because I go to see psychiatrists and neuropsychologists, and they say, you're at MIT with a full tuition scholarship. How can you have cognitive impairments? You're imagining. There's nothing wrong with your memory. There's nothing wrong with your math. There's nothing wrong with your cognition. Like you're fine. You're neurotic. Is all. You're a spoiled overachiever is the message I got. No, I wasn't good at math. I can tell you why. My autism made it so I can't read math. I was dyslexic for words, but I was also dyslexic for math. Like when I would receive an equation, I couldn't process it. So the reason I was good at, say, like SAT stuff is because it's word problems. It's words. If I could get the idea into my head, then I would be okay. But like talking about it in terms of equations and variables and symbols, I just my brain has a really hard time with. So if I can get it from talking about it, if you can set it up in a way I can see it, then I can do some math. But that math ability, I acquired over time. I wasn't born with it, but I had a natural knack for the kind of math you find on the SAT. I was good at that garden variety stuff. And based on that, everybody thinks I was a math genius, but I wasn't. I was
What were you
terrible.
majoring
I didn't have any intuition. And what
were you majoring in?
At MIT, I triple majored in cognitive science, computer science, and finance, but I didn't know what I was doing. I say that, people think, oh, you're really smart or really ambitious. No, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I just, any random thing, oh, that sounds okay, I'll major in that too, why not?
But so it does suggest that you had a propensity to be thinking about things in these quantitative ways, because all three of those, I mean, you kind of trash cognitive science in the book, where you're like, these are people that have devoted themselves to words exclusively and have done no work on mathematics. But computer science and finance are pretty mathematical and quantitative. So at the very least, you had some kind of inclination towards it, where if you are starting to receive some kind of mathematical insight, then it pushes you progressively deeper into it. It's not like you're somebody who's, do you know the term word cell?
No.
So
like incel for words?
It's basic. So the dichotomy is word cell and shape rotator. And so a word cell is somebody who is completely trapped in the world of words because they can't rotate shapes. And shape rotators are the programmers, the engineers, the mathematicians. And so they're the ones that are getting the high proof computational jobs at, investment firms and OpenAI and whatever. And the word cells are the ones that are writing, puff pieces for magazines about, my time on the Appalachian Trail or something. But so you clearly had some kind of alignment towards it.
I've always liked systems. So like my natural affinity and my natural understanding is with systems, with dynamic systems in particular, I can say now, but like with the mind, I like cognitive science because I like complicated things with lots of moving parts. Like that's a natural fit for me. And finance seemed like that, and cognitive science seemed like that. So it definitely wasn't the math. I was no good at writing and I was no good at math. It doesn't seem like that now based on what I've done, but really, it was all because of Intex. I mean, when I was young, I didn't want to do math. I tried to pass out of all the math from AP credits and stuff like that, so I would never have to do. I thought I'd get through MIT without having to do much math, which that's kind of a funny way to approach MIT, I guess. But yeah, like it.
So I really want to get the thread of this laid out. So you're in the Maze of Souls. Presumably at some point the trip ends. You are now back in your dorm room. You have this experience that you have to wrestle with.
Yeah.
What happens that you almost die?
So I had no filter back then. Combination. I was a teenager. I was autistic, and just immature. Didn't know anything. So I told I openly talked. Hey, I talked to the God of Five. In the Maze of Souls. So the dean of student affairs, I remember his name, Robert Randolph, at MIT, called me into his office and basically, gave me a chance to talk about it. And I was very earnest. It did not occur to me that, you shouldn't go talk to a dean about, talking to gods, or you're not going to stick around that university for much longer. So with great enthusiasm, because I still remember thinking, he's going to think this is amazing and wonderful, and he's going to help me out. I was like, oh, the maze, and this, and then the God of Five. And I still remember, I even said, it was as if I discovered the Ark of the Covenant. And I think that's when he said, well, here is some paperwork for you. I think you need a leave of absence, my friend. And so I was booted from MIT. And the MIT contacted psychiatrists and my parents, and I was required to go see a psychiatrist as a condition for ever returning to MIT. But the idea was just to get me committed into a mental institution as soon as possible. And I did. I got committed to a mental hospital in Baltimore after this. Correctly, I don't blame anybody. If a kid shows up saying they talk to gods, they hear the voice of gods, yeah, they should be committed. I would do this exact same thing. So as I was in there, and what the experience had done to me was, I was sure it was real. there's nothing I can say other than if you experienced it, you would be sure it's real too. I had this experience. It was incredibly real. It was incredibly intense, and it shook everything. And so I thought the shared reality is some kind of echo of the real thing, and the real thing is the Maze of Souls and this God of Five and this thing that I experienced. I've got to get back there. I've got to get back to this world, this place, and if I need to kill myself to get there, it doesn't matter because that's the real world. And what if I'm wrong? What if this is reality and somehow I just experienced a delusion? Well, how would I ever go on in this reality knowing there was a delusion so grand and so convincing and so mathematical and so complicated and rich, and yet it's not reality? It seemed to me in my 18-year-old way of thinking that I wanted to go back there. And I thought if I killed myself, I would go back to the Maze of Souls in a kind of a permanent way. It would be like a demonstration of my commitment or something like that. And if I was wrong, I was going to die anyway. It wasn't like nobody lives forever. So that was my reasoning. So I drove to Florida and I swallowed quite a few pills and died there on the beach near Cape Canaveral. And then I when I died, I did go back into the Maze of Souls, and I encountered the other entity, the God of Three. Now I call them three. At the time, I called them the God of Five and the God of Three because they sure seemed like gods in my subjective experience. And Five had told me about Three, and I had some interactions with Three beforehand. But then, when I killed myself, I went right to Three, and it was very deeply unpleasant. I don't like to think about it. I suppress it. One of the reasons I see now that I've been able to manage this, that I see now there's a lot of quirks about my brain that explain why I've been able to manage this, and maybe other people would have a harder time. I'm resistant to post-traumatic stress disorder because of my autism. My autism interferes with my episodic memory. I have terrible episodic memory. I have a terrible memory for events and people. They just get eroded very quickly. But if you have trauma, they have drugs now to prevent PTSD, and those drugs work by disrupting episodic memory. Because if you prevent episodic memory from forming memories, then you don't have PTSD. And so I think a lot of these experiences I had were just PTSD generating. I mean, they're traumatic, but I overcame them relatively quickly because of my autism made my episodic memory fade away. So during the experience and immediately afterwards, the intensity is off the charts, but for me, it decreases really. As soon as I fall asleep and wake up the next morning, the fear, the trauma is radically reduced. And I've experienced other trauma in my life, not just extraterrestrial trauma, and I always recovered quickly, I think, because of it. And now I recognize this is probably if I had been burdened by that trauma. Shiloh, you mentioned some people that were destroyed, by these things. Yes, I can see how. I was able to put it. I was able to extract it, like the key abstract things, but push the emotionality, let the emotionality fade away, and just deal with the facts themselves. I think is why I've been able to make so much progress. That if I had like a normal brain,
there's something so devastating about having an experience that you can't relate to others too, which I think is right, because you have to come back to earth at the end of the day.
Yes.
With any of these transformative experiences, and then deal with the same people that you were dealing with before, and you've changed, but maybe they haven't.
Yeah.
They have no awareness of that, and you have a particularly, I can just see it on your face, you have a particular optimism about that, and you don't have a fear about trying to relate these experiences that I think kind of devastates other people, or forces them inside of themselves in a way that they lose the ability to interact with other people. That's just my take on it.
I was lucky because I found joy. I am in a place of joy. I love my life. I've got connections to people I love. I've got a 5-year-old son I love, got a good relationship with him. I have a house that I love, that suits me, that I earned over a long time. I never thought I'd own property. I own a house I love. And I feel connected to the universe in indescribable ways. like you, I like to go out. I commune with nature. I walk in the woods every day. There's a graveyard right across the street. For me, a 30-second walk. I spend a lot of time there because it's nature. It's big and it's rustic and plenty of trees and lots of flowers. So I spend as much time as I can with nature and connected to these things and connected to people. And I have a joyful life. And all of this that I've learned and that they've shared is it's a beautiful, wonderful thing. I said, the core of it is love. I understand why love is real. There's a cosmic purpose to it. It's not just this human invention. Physicists would have us believe it's all aimless matter. It's what we project onto it. No, not at all. It's designed around love and compassion, and that animates me and makes me want to share it. I view it as positive, and it does make me optimistic. Why would all of this happen and have shared it with me? And why would I end up in such a place of joy and understanding and connection? And still curiosity, if not to share it with others, and if it wasn't something important and meaningful. I mean, that's where I am. That's my mindset.
Go ahead.
Would you mind if we took a quick bathroom break? Actually,
oh sure.
I have to use the bathroom. I'm sorry.
Sure. I'll go too if you don't mind.
All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Maybe 5 minutes.
Yeah, sounds
perfect.
good. See you in a bit.
Let me tell you why I love you guys so much, and I do love you guys. So science is a word like justice or freedom or obscenity, where everybody's got their own definition, and it's kind of when you see it. Is most people's definition. I like your guys' science. For me, you guys are what scientists should be, which is curiosity first rather than skepticism. Yes, you need skepticism, but if you're leading with skepticism, you're not going to embrace and connect with nature as it unfolds. You got to put yourself out there and connect, and you got to be driven by curiosity. What is this thing? What is this mystery? And then there's plenty of time for skepticism later, when you're really deliberating through it. But you got to lead. I just think you always got to lead and end with curiosity, and you guys do. And that's what I love about you so much, is that you really see that so many people they lead with a skepticism. They want to take things down, to show they're smart by criticizing things and attacking things. I mean, that's got a place. You need it, but if you're really going to do science, discover new things about reality, your heart's got to be filled with curiosity, like your hearts are. And so that's why I'm so delighted to be on your show.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I think there's the counterpart to that is that I think we've replaced the skepticism with a demand for understanding, right? So it's when things don't make sense to me, I want to ask more questions and learn about this person's idea, because obviously they believe in it. They think they are onto something. And so if something doesn't make sense to me, that's kind of the point that I'll come from. It's like, can you help me make sense of this? Yeah. Which is essentially the same thing as being skeptical, but it's a very different approach. And it really keeps you focused on me and you versus this problem, as opposed to me versus you, which is just destructive.
Yeah. It keeps you in a learning mindset. When you're a skeptic, you're kind of standing above and apart, looking down, but when you're a learner, you're asking, you want to understand, you want help understanding this thing. And so, like you said, they're similar, but fundamentally, there's a key human difference in the mindset there.
Well, I think that it's where you start from, right? Do you start from a place of denial, or do you start from a place of maybe? And I think that skeptics in general start from a place of denial, where their job is to take something down and to take it apart. And you can see this in the tone of the way that people who brand themselves as skeptics present their ideas, where it's mocking, it's kind of cruel. It's the goal is to speak to an audience who agrees with you, who acknowledges that you guys are smarter than the person that you're discussing, or you're better than the idea that you're discussing. And I don't know, I grew up in a family where the way that we discussed things was very aggressive. And I never particularly liked it. Like, I became very conflict-oriented because that was just the mode of discourse in the family. And as I've gotten older, I'm like, well, hold on a second. Why are we throwing out all of these ideas that probably warrant discussion? Everything from, religion to consciousness to astrophysics. It's like, it's very, very easy to throw out an idea because somebody in a place of authority tells you that you should throw the idea out. But how many times have we been through the arc where we're like, hold on a second, somebody said that we should throw that out, but it turns out we probably shouldn't have.
Or there's one little tiny aspect of it that's flawed, right?
Shiloh is magnificent at this. This was a transformative experience for me because Shiloh would be able to look at this fringe idea that's totally out there that I encounter and I'm like, why would you waste time on this? And he would be able to filter through it and be like, most of it is garbage, but there's actually this one little piece here that's really interesting. And I think that we should include it in, this thing that we're trying to explain. And it would just always blow my mind because you read so quickly and you read with such a searchlight almost, where you're like, the light that you cast on things allows you to catch the glimmer of something that's worth paying attention to in a really interesting way.
Yeah, and talking about higher purpose too, I just realized the more and more I go down this journey of life that if I can do one thing in this universe, if we can do one thing together, it's going to be reorienting people towards this curiosity mindset, which has been just bled out of the sciences and largely out of the arts as well. There's a lot of conformity and I have my own theories, right? I do science and I value that, and I do art, I do music, and I value that, but I don't think that that's going to live for 20,000 years. What can possibly live for 20,000 years is a new way of approaching problems, right? That's really just a very human goal. And so the tiniest bit that we can contribute to that, I just find so much meaning and purpose in it. It's just overflowing my cup most days.
I couldn't agree with you more, Shiloh. And I'd even say that academia, because of its incentive structure and social dynamics, quashes that curiosity. Because let's say you pass that moment where some authority said, hey, don't look at this doesn't matter. Well, if you're going to draw attention to it, nobody in your community is going to respond because they were all told not to look at it too. And the incentive is to do the same thing everybody else is looking at, or at least talk about those domains or those areas or those sectors. Academia is about closing off places and domains and ideas and directions.
But I don't think that it always was. And that's the thing that's so weird to me because there's been this eradication of mysticism, which I understand. And obviously the show is called DemystifySci, so clearly we have oriented ourselves in one direction relative to the mysticism. But the more that we do this show, the more that it seems like there is something that is really mystical about biology. And it's this question of purpose, and it's the question of will, and it's the question of orienting yourself to a future that hasn't happened yet. And science doesn't have the ability to talk about those things because those were always in the domain of religion. They were always in the domain of ceremony. They always sat somewhere else. And so now you have this weird thing where it's like, okay, well, science is the only thing that we use to encounter nature, but we have no mysticism within it. And so what does that mean for our connection to whatever you want to call the divine?
Can I just interject? I think the reason that we titled the show that originally is because we were coming at it from a physics standpoint, and we were like, look, trying to use physics to apprehend all of these cosmic questions is probably not the best approach. And so, you've talked about the purposeless versus the purpose in defining what physics really is. And I think that's why we ended up naming the show that originally, and now we're just kind of stuck with it.
Demystifying physics, but not the rest of sciences is a harder mouthful to
You should call your show DemystifySci.
We've heard that
I'd say that's what I've done, is I've brought mysticism back into science. This is pretty much what I've done.
As long as it stays out of physics.
It doesn't belong in physics.
Right.
Let me say a few things. Nastya and Shiloh, you're speaking my language, you're speaking from my heart. I think mysticism is about a mindset. It's about an attitude. It's about a way of engaging with the world that's curiosity-based rather than the skepticism-based. And my favorite example is Isaac Newton. Modern physicists have this ridiculous myth of Isaac Newton as this paragon of rationality and humanity and farsightedness, shedding the burden of mysticism and superstition in favor of the clear logic of physics. He was nothing of the sort. He believed that he alone had direct contact with God, that the entire Church of England was corrupt and useless, and that he alone could figure out the word of God as written in the book of Daniel and in the book of Revelations. His greatest effort was not Principia Mathematica, it was interpreting the book of Daniel. He spent most of his life on that after he figured out Principia Mathematica. The point, why I love this so much, is for him, reality was a mystic, divine experience. There was no separation between him and the numinousness of the world. And he thought the Principia Mathematica, he thought he was getting the mind of God, not in an abstract mathematical way, but in a blooded, sweaty, this is God himself. The technicolor eruption of mystic revelation is coming to me. That's what Isaac Newton was all about. He spent far more time. He wrote millions of words more about alchemy and about prophecy, Christian prophecy, than he did about classical mechanics. His entire idea of absolute time, if you read any contemporary pop physics book, even my favorite guys is Rosselli.
Carlo Rovelli?
Rovelli. I love Rovelli. But even he succumbed to this, that they talk about Newton's idea of absolute time as if he had some grand mathematical basis for it. Like, Rovelli's praises Einstein for uniting Newton's idea of absolute time and Aristotle's idea of time. Newton believed in absolute time because he believed in prophecy. He thought God had scheduled different events to happen, different revelatory events to happen according to a timeline. And Newton spent most of his life trying to figure out this timeline. And so he needed absolute time so that on this day, God could let this Christian revelation or unfold in reality. So that's the only reason he believed in absolute time. There wasn't any mathematical basis for it. And then so scientists today take very seriously that he proposed this mathematical notion, and here we got to take it seriously and we got to build it. No. He believed that the book of Daniel was a book of prophecy about when heaven was going to come to earth, and Newton thought he figured out the date, and that's why there was absolute time, so God could have a revelation on a timeline.
Do you think that there are mystical experiences that people have had with God that are the same as the experience that you're having with Intex?
It's physical reality. So if you have this experience, you're having an experience with physical reality. Physical reality is the same for all of us. Our perspective and our context obviously changes, but we're all engaged with reality. So these things that I've come in contact, I think I've come in contact with something we all come in contact with. We all are interacting with it. We just don't know what to do with it. We don't have the infrastructure. In our mind and in our community, we live in a time right now where everybody tells to turn away from this. Like we're talking about here, mysticism has no place in science is the attitude right now. Understandably, look, I don't want to pretend like, why is this? We should all embrace mysticism. No, I understand why people want to keep mysticism out. That's not a mystery to me why nobody wants mysticism in science. But it is a very healthy mindset to feel like we are part of the universe. The universe has something to say to us, that we can learn hidden things about the universe, not just through science, but through direct experience. Most of the stuff I learned in life is from direct experience, not because I read it in a physics book or a science book.
I mean, and it's also worth it doesn't seem sustainable to only approach the world in terms of the mechanics of it, right? We're facing a huge crisis as a civilization, which is that a lot of our superstructures that we've built to govern us and operate our economies don't seem to be particularly humane.
They're not moral, I think, is probably the larger category of that. Right? Because humane is just one aspect of it, but it's like you've talked before where you find that they're not oriented towards a higher value. And I think that might, the term for that might be moral.
Yeah, I mean, we had this really fascinating economist on the show the other day, Michael Hudson, and you should read his work. It's just incredible. Actually, check out that podcast if you have time. I'm going to listen to it again myself. It was just fascinating.
What's his name?
Michael Hudson. But Hudson references his ideas about economics he pegs them to functional economies in the past versus dysfunctional ones that collapsed. And and pegs them to the states that house those economies. And one of the things that just keeps cropping up is that the rulers that were able to actually forgive debt in the past, and the rulers that were actually able to oversee functional economies, were these divine kings, essentially, that were, their fundamental responsibility was towards cosmic harmony, essentially. And he kind of glosses over that a little bit, but I don't think that it's as insignificant as he tries to make it. I think there's really something interesting there about the leadership and this society being this pyramid that's actually pointed at something beyond the individual losses and gains, that's actually aimed upward towards something. And I feel like humanity's gonna have to, just our country is gonna have to find a way to reorient itself towards something like that if we want to persist for another 1,000 years or whatever.
But it seems impossible that it could go any other way, because
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
you just, if you limit yourself to the material flows, then there's no purpose, because it's just, you're basically recapitulating that particulate chaos on the level of the society.
Yeah, it's like you're trying to build a physical system when it's not a physical system. You're treating it like a physics equation, like it's a purposeless dynamics, but in reality, it's everything but that.
We forget, or actually there's people that just outright deny it, but not long ago in the West, we had a Christian society where Christianity, the belief system, was integrated at every level, but it gave everybody a sense of meaning and connection and purpose, in addition to explaining all the physical stuff. Here's why the sun goes around the earth, because God made it so. But it gave everybody a sense of meaning and connection. We killed the Christianity because the ideas about physics are all wrong. But with that, we lost something enormous.
Mm-hmm.
We lost the connection to nature and reality. And we're all skeptics, like you were describing. We build these, when we go about building these new systems, we just want to make them as mathematically efficient as possible, according to the physics, according to the engineering, according to the math. Like, that's where our mindset is, because that's where our culture has moved as we've rejected, the religions. But we've lost that. Under Christian times, the first thing we think is, well, this must be true to Christ, which now we laugh, haha, superstition. But it was really something about the value and the morals of it and the connection, and it's going to serve a purpose in people's lives to give them meaning and dignity and things like that. That was a part of designing anything back then. And now it's just, let's make it as efficient and effective as we can, which there's great benefits. I don't want to pretend this is not an advantage and another step up, but if you don't have that moral aspect, if you don't have that mysticism, that connection, then you're always losing something, and you're always going to leave people feeling alienated and disconnected. And what is this system to me that you've built, this strange, cold mathematical thing? What is this? So, and this is why I tell you, I feel so much joy, is because in my life, I've wedded science and mysticism in a very natural way. I've got a framework for understanding reality. It's based in reality. It doesn't violate any science, known science, just adds stuff to what we know, but it gives us meaning. Our lives matter. We have purpose. The things we do in our life will define what happens next. Humanity may ascend, we may wipe ourselves out. Both of those are very real possibilities, and it's up to all of us. What we each do in our lives, it matters. There's not predestination.
I'm really more worried about the third option, was just not we wipe ourselves out or anything, but that we just keep cycling in this like grind of, if this government falls apart, well, then we just end up with another one that sucks too, and we just keep doing it over and over if we don't make this realignment occur.
And I tend to think that a lot of this is going to happen. It's not, if we do evolve, if we do find that way to build a new society where there's a greater sense of meaning and connection in these things, I think it will come about because we keep trying things. That is, I don't think it's something that we can all sit down together and design. We can't get there by design. It is this massive, complex purpose working out. It's what we're all doing. We're all doing our things. We're here in the show talking about a specific angle. There's other people in other shows talking about how to shape the future in different ways. All this plays itself out and it works itself out. We've gotten this far. We've been evolving minds for about 1 billion years here on Earth, and our minds are 4 levels up from archaea mind. Evolutionists, biologists are fond of saying, evolution has no goal, evolution has no purpose. I think that's always was a dangerous and bad attitude. There is purpose. It's mental purpose. We are definitely ascending. We are going somewhere. If you look at it in terms of the mind and look at it in terms of purpose, it's clearly a ladder of purpose. We are going up. If you look at the physical aspects of evolution, like is it hands or fins or beaks or talent? No, there's no goal there. Like the goal is not to make a hand instead of a beak, but the goal is to have smarter minds, to have more adaptive minds. And the way you get that, back to my main claim, you get that through love. You get that through compassion. Let me say something, because I promised your audience that I'd explain why the universe is designed around compassion. This is a good way to talk about it. So there's these levels of purpose, rungs on the ladder. The lowest rung are the molecule minds, minds that think in terms of points, minds of single cell creatures. I'm sorry, I don't know how I thought I turned off that. Single cell creatures. To get to the next level, to the neuron level, something had to have happened. And what happened was all these individual minds, all these molecule minds, these individual cells started to connect. They started to share. They started to join as one. They started to sacrifice. They started to act selflessly. They decided to sacrifice their individuality for a group. That's how we got to the next stage of minds, neurominds. And then it happened again. At each neural network, like there's neural networks in worms and jellyfish and insects, for those to come together to be able to do visual object recognition, for example, they too had to sacrifice their individuality, their identity, their individual purpose in order to conjoin their purpose with the purpose of others for a higher purpose that then led to a system that was capable of greater intelligence and greater adaptability. But it did that through self-sacrifice and connection and compassion. And then for us as humans, we had to learn to be together around a campfire. We had to learn to be together in a cave. It seems easy and natural to us now, but try to get 6 tigers that don't know each other to go sit in the same room. It's not going to be pretty. Even 6 chimpanzees from different places, get them in a single room. They're not going to sit and calmly interact with each other if they don't know each other. But we do. For us, it's no big deal at all. That took time, and it took self-sacrifice. We have to be willing to sacrifice to raise kids, to raise a human child. Oh my God, at least 18 years of your life is committed to this. Bird, it's a few weeks, like 6 to 10 weeks, maybe. Less than a year. But for us, it's a long, long time. And for us to get to the next level, which is what humanity is wrestling with right now, I believe this is what's happening with social media, why social media is so nasty and chaotic, and our global state right now is so chaotic. War in Ukraine, conflict with China, all of this is trying to work through to create that next level, try to get to a hypermind. And the only way we'll get there is through love and compassion, through sacrificing our own desires and our own purpose to conjoin with others for a greater purpose. This is how every stage of thinking has unfolded on Earth. Each time, to get to the new level of intelligence and awareness, to have a broader scope of interaction with reality, a broader scope of mastery of chaos. Each time you have to build a whole new layer, and the only way to get to that new layer is by connectivity, by willingly sacrificing your individuality for the greater good. And that's, for us, that's humans' challenge. We'll only get to that next level if we can find it in ourselves as individuals to sacrifice for the greater good. So that's the challenge before us. And it's a wonderful challenge. It's a great system. I love this system. Like, the only way you get to be these masterful minds, these super powerful extraterrestrials, is if you've found love at higher and higher and more sophisticated levels. So it is a very positive view of the universe that intelligence and power is limited by your ability to connect and love and share with others.
Well, there's a
If we
weird
don't do
thing
that, then we get to the next level.
There's a weird thing that's happening on planet Earth, though, which is that on one hand, I think that people are inherently interested in love, connection, compassion, and the progression to the next level. But there's there's a political envelope that is carrying that message. Like we saw it during the pandemic, for example, where there was the narrative of compassion was used to implement kind of weird social policies that further cleaved people, right? Because the narrative of, okay, so everybody has to get vaccinated is fundamentally a compassion narrative because you get vaccinated in order to protect others. And when in the aftermath, you can look at that narrative and you can realize that it starts to fall apart. Now there's more and more people that are like, hey, that was crazy, wasn't it? And so there's clearly some kind of interest that isn't compassionate, right? Because who's creating the branding for this love and compassion? It's people that are involved in, say, the pharmaceutical industry. And the pharmaceutical industry has a long track record of doing really suspicious things with their medicines. Like we talk about the Vioxx scandal a lot, right? Merck knew that their replacement for NSAIDs was causing heart problems in people, and they think that in excess of something like 80,000 people got heart problems from taking Vioxx, and 38,000 of them died. And this was known by Merck, and they continued to market the drug. And so now they've paid out, they've gone through court, they've paid out billions of dollars, significantly less than a single year's profit that they made off of the drug. But so it's like a slap on the wrist. But these structures are accumulating power in a way that feels like it's not particularly compassionate, but it is cloaked in the language of compassion. Do you know what I mean by that?
Well, compassion still needs to get worked out, right? Like the right way to express compassion, the effective way to express compassion, the true way to express compassion, it's an empirical thing, so it needs to be worked out. I'd rather have somebody trying to act out of compassion and then implementing it in a bad way than not even valuing that at all. But it's not easy or straightforward that just because you love others, feel compassion to others, that will automatically unfold in a productive, constructive way.
Well, for me, it shows that A, people are inherently motivated by compassion, but B, that there are more sinister forces that would use that against them as well. And that is a real force to be reckoned with. And we can go back through the history of the world and see how people have taken people's inherent goodness and turned it against their interests. And this is what, Mike Hudson does a good job of laying out an economic path to reconstructing something that would be more in line with humanity. But it's almost like there's these different parallel paths that need to be operating simultaneously. On one hand, you need structural solutions. You need to design a government that isn't just feeding all of your wealth to this financial parasite, essentially. But you also need, on an individual level, to have a place where people feel freed enough from their own burdens of daily living, right? They don't have a boot on their neck, so they can actually experience that open heart and actually open themselves up. And it's a very hard thing to do when you're just, head down in the trench trying to put food on the table for your family or something like that. I know myself personally, like when my compassion really wanes is when I'm under a lot of stress and when I feel like my world's falling apart. It's like I just don't have the space for compassion at that point. So there's a lot of different factors that can be, there's a lot of different paths to that future that are all kind of need to unfold in parallel, the way I see it.
It is the great challenge for our species. Nothing easy about it. And we're talking about evolving to a whole new level of awareness and being. Think how long it took us to get here. So we're going at a crazy fast clip now. That each new stage is happening faster and faster, but still, it's a slow, complicated, difficult process, and we don't know what it'll look like. It makes it wonderful too. If we knew what that perfect utopia of the next level would be, we could all get there. But it gives our lives meaning as we each try to figure it out. We each make our contribution to try to, what is the best path to get there? What should that look like? It makes life great.
How do you square the fact that when you speak to Intex, it's this really frightening and unsettling experience with the arc of history bending towards compassion?
Oh, the terror is just because it violates everything about reality that if you hear something talking to you out of your speaker that's not there, I mean, it's a burden on the mind. It feels, when that kind of stuff happens, it doesn't feel comfortable. I don't know. It's when you're experiencing things that can't possibly be real, but they're real. Yeah, it's very disconcerting and stressful.
What does the voice sound like?
It's different at different times. It's male sometimes, it's female sometimes. Most of the time it's gender neutral. Gender is a big thing in this. I don't like talking about this too much, but there is, the reason I call it the Maze of Souls is because in the very early going, I realized it's possible to become other people. I think as a result of this connection, that the fact that this machine, this interface allows you to connect with it can make you become it. I wouldn't say, I don't know, pretend to know how it works, but you can become somebody else. I mean, the first experience I had was when I lived at MIT in my dorm, my next door neighbor, directly next door in my dorm, he was the president of our dorm, and he jumped off senior house. He jumped off our dorm and died.
Oh wow!
And in my first experience, I thought I was him. I experienced jumping off the roof as him and dying, and then came out as me. And that was very disturbing and disconcerting. And it violates, we all have a deep sense of expectation about how reality works, and you get something like that that violates all of that, and it's hard to cope with. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of technical details, one thing that I didn't glean from the book is you talk about this thing called rainbow black, but I didn't get a good sense of what that was.
That I prefer to let people read the book about
Okay.
that. So I'll just say now that the first time I encountered this Intex that calls itself Poet, Poet shared with me this idea of rainbow black as, I know what it is now, so I'm trying to remember what it was initially presented as a source of creativity. It was a source of all creativity for the universe, perhaps. Definitely a place where I would get answers about who I am. So once I was in the Maze of Souls and interacting with there's questions about what am I? Because other people aren't having these experiences. So am I chosen? Is there something different about me? Am I even human? What the heck am I that nobody else seems to be having this? And I talk to them and they think I'm psychotic, but I know I've had these experiences. What is this?
Mm. Is there a way for people to go into the Maze of Souls?
I think so, and I'm trying. That's why I'm writing this book. I hope that some people will read it and be able to figure out how to get in. It's an invitation. It's there for all of us. There's nothing special about me. I have my brain is broken and has some neural quirks, mostly through this autism, that I think facilitated it. It probably made it easier for me. I now understand I was well suited for this, but I'm well suited, but anybody else can do it. You don't have to be LeBron James to play basketball. Maybe I was born with LeBron James' body for this kind of thing. I think is the case, but now that I've done it, I can show other people how to play basketball. It's sort of how I hope that's my mission. That's what I want. I want other people more than anything. It sucks being alone. I want to talk to people about this stuff. I just turned 50 and I want to talk to people. It's lonely as hell. And I want to get other people in here. It's such a, morally though, I have such mixed feelings because it's terrifying and it's awful. And my working hypothesis is if you jump into the Maze of Souls, wherever you come out is not where you started. I think it's one way. So I think I no longer go in the maze of souls. I should say that. Since I got married to my current wife, I don't go in the maze of souls anymore because I am very, very afraid that you go in and you come out somewhere else. You don't come back to the same place you started. And that's kind of my own personal focus these days in the Intex stuff, is trying to figure this out. Can I go back? What is really happening with this when I go in and come out? What is really happening? I'm really trying to understand these days. And if other people went in, it would be easier to solve. So I would like to get other people in there. That's why I'm writing this book.
What do you mean that you come out in a different place? Because in the book, it seems like that's almost a physical thing in some cases. Like there's this, you end up in Russia.
Right.
And the way that you write it is that you basically come out of the maze of souls and you find yourself in Russia and you have to kind of backfill all of the things that led you to this moment that you're in the airport and you're watching the September 11th attacks on the television.
So that's a good example. So Intex gave me this puzzle of 9 dots. I solved it. And when I solved it, I teleported to Moscow. And that's a good example of what I mean by, what if I wasn't even on Earth or even a human before that? What if I was some other entity, maybe on another planet, maybe another alien, and I went through and I came out as a human in Moscow? I don't know. And in my conversations with Five and Poet, they started to strongly suggest that it's one way and you don't go back. That's why mostly why I feel this way. And there's this thing you alluded to called backfill, which is when these things happen, when you teleport, like a memory fills in, but it really, the subjective experience, the memory feels very fake. It feels fabricated. It's hard to describe, because I remember the thing that happened. I remember solving the 9 dots and teleporting, but then there's this memory of other stuff that happened that kind of gets filled in. And I've had this backfill experience quite a bit. I understand it probably sounds like mental illness, but some of the backfill experiences are not just remembering things like, well, once, I hate to think about and talk about, but I got in a situation where I pulled out my eye, and so and I got fixed, and the backfill was like why I didn't really pull out my eye. So there's a lot of crazy things about this backfill, but all of this has led me to believe that I'm not certain if I go in the maze of souls, like I'll come out as something and I'll have memories of being that something, but I may not remember being human. I may not remember talking to you guys. I'll have a different set of memories. I'm entertaining this possibility very strongly. Let's put it that way. Until I want to get some kind of evidence somehow that I am actually going back and not just going to new places before I go back in the maze of souls.
Well, there has to be some kind of external corroboration, right? So if you go into the maze of souls and then you end up somewhere else, then can't there be a process by which you call somebody up and you're like, hey, have you seen me in the last couple of weeks?
Well, the point would be, this is just a new reality that I'm now in. I was in another reality, like imagine a multiverse, right? So the latest Spider-Man, I don't know if you've seen it, just to give a concrete example, like Doctor Strange is jumping between different universes. So it would be more like that. If he's in that universe, he can't call somebody up because they're going to say, no, your name's not Doctor Strange. You're John Strange and you work as a janitor. You're not some magical wizard of the arts. But he'll remember, oh no, I was in another world where I was a magical wizard of the arts, even though nobody's corroborating that. That's the sort of thing I mean. But a lot of this comes from this. Multiple times I've felt myself becoming someone else in the maze of souls in very convincing ways, not like in a vague, dreamy way, like I'm this other person. Oh my God. And all of that has now just made me think that, like, whatever's happening in the maze of souls, it may not be like me having this and then coming back to being me. It might be I go forward into something else. That my mental dynamics, there's definitely a very strong sense that my mental dynamics are going into the maze of souls, experiencing this maze of souls, and then they come out somewhere. Are they coming back out into my brain or coming out in something else? I don't know. This is a big question mark for me, and I don't want to pretend that I understand it. I'm just sharing that I have a great fear about this now. This is something that's only developed in the past 10 years.
Well, it's a big philosophical dilemma too. This how transformative experiences alter who you become makes it impossible to decide whether you want to engage in a transformative experience in the first place. One of the first guests we had on the show was L.A. Paul, who I believe is at Yale, but she had this, thought experiment about vampires, which was like, if a vampire asked you if you want to be a vampire, you can live forever. Would you do it or would you not do it? But the tricky part is that you don't know whether it's fun to be a vampire until you are a vampire.
Right.
And not only that, but all of your experiences change once you've had the experience, once you've gone through it. Because you're like, well, I don't really want to drink blood. But then by the time that you're a vampire, you're like, no, I love drinking blood. And so it's this thing that you are not the same person anymore once you have gone through the transformative experience. And so there's a break between those two states.
That's a great example. Yeah, it's like that. I mean, and this is also why I want people to experience it, but I'm also hesitant because it's like inviting somebody to be a vampire. And that's exactly it. Like, are you going to like being a vampire? In the end, I like this life, but for the first 15 years, my life was hell. I was terrible. I wouldn't want to wish my life on anyone. And just figuring all this stuff out took a lot of time and a lot of effort, and it was scary. And I was alone for most of it. I was a drug addict at one point, things like that. Nothing. I want other people. Now, would I say it's worth it where I am now? Yeah. I mean, now I get to understand the universe and I have connection and I talk to extraterrestrials whenever I wish. It's a pretty great experience now. But if you had talked to me in the first 15 years, no, I would have said it's terrifying and awful. Get me the hell out of this. I don't want this at all.
What attracted you to drugs, do you think?
Well, my own addiction was consequence of my autism. So the drug I got addicted to was ecstasy, MDMA. And for a simple reason, it eliminated my autism. It's a social drug. I don't know if either of you have taken it, but certainly its effect on me was, as an autistic person, my social emotions, my sense of connection to other people was limited. I'm different now. I've overcome it. But for most of my life, because of my autism, I couldn't connect with other people in a very thin and shallow, tentative way. I had trouble getting other people's perspectives, understanding what other people are thinking and feeling was a big challenge. But what direction was this heading? Sorry.
Oh, I was just trying to understand. Yeah, I really just wanted to understand what the appeal. You said that you had a moment of fighting with drug addiction. And
yes. Oh, sorry. Because I was going to explain why I got addicted to ecstasy. Because of my autism, I don't connect with others. I took ecstasy, and all of a sudden I'm feeling social feelings. And I have memory. The most incredible thing is I'd remember social connection. So I'd remember a friend, say, or a teacher or a family member, and I'd suddenly remember all these emotions I had towards them across my entire life, even though I didn't have those emotions. I was autistic. But it's like I have a memory of having all these rich, syrupy, loving emotions full of things. So I had never had that. So basically, ecstasy made me a full feeling human being, and I had never experienced that. And so I just took it as often as I possibly could. I absolutely became addicted to it. So that was not really related to Intex in any direct way. It was just something that arose because my autism. But because of I had structured my life around Intex, I was more vulnerable to addiction because I was very isolated. I was spending all my time trying to understand Intex on my own, and the whole kind of life situation of going into Intex made me open me up to this addiction. That if I had a job, a normal functional life, then probably the addiction would have never unfolded, and I would never got into it as much as I did. But yeah, so the first 15 years of my life was rough. I wouldn't want to wish it on anybody, and I am afraid that if other people try this, they're going to end up in those places. I don't really know how you'd avoid it, because to get from there to where I am now, I mean, you got to go through a lot. You got to work through this stuff, and it's not easy stuff to work through. I mean, at some point, you got to have contact with extraterrestrials, and how you're going to deal with that and manage that. I have to imagine every individual is going to be different. And we're talking about maybe people have encountered these sorts of things, in their life already. Maybe even the shamanistic practices, in other cultures or in the past that facilitated this. But if there was, it was because I knew how dangerous and difficult and intense it could be. So doing it on your own, I don't know. So I'm writing this book. I genuinely want people to be able to experience what I experienced, but I kind of don't want everybody to. There's even a balance. I'm doing a balancing act. Like I don't want to make it too obvious and too easy. I don't think it would ever be obvious or easy, but people need to do a little effort, and you only are going to do that effort if you really want to get there. And I want people to think about it and have a chance to reflect on that. You might be a vampire at the end of it. You might be sucking blood, and are you going to enjoy sucking blood? You don't know until you're sucking it, right?
So what do you make of the little green men version of aliens that seems to be in the cultural consciousness?
I think they're gray.
Are they? Okay. Gray, green, but just basically that there's these humanoid figures that are crash landing on Earth, and that the US government has their bodies, and that, there's hundreds of whistleblowers that are coming out and basically telling stories of alien contact.
Honestly, the number one person I blame are physicists, and I blame Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan in the 70s, 80s, and 90s articulated a vision of extraterrestrial. And I know Area 51, was it 51 or 54? Area 50?
51, yeah.
51. All of that predates Sagan himself, but it was very much in line with physicists. The big start of modern search for extraterrestrials was at Green Bank, West Virginia in the early 60s. It might have even been 1960. I can't recall. When Carl Sagan was there, Frank Drake, very famous, the guy that organized it, and he came up with Drake's equation, and he did the first transmission to extraterrestrials on the radio dish and receiver. All of that, and especially Carl Sagan going out there, completely shaped Western mind's idea of extraterrestrials, and especially Hollywood's idea of extraterrestrials. So people imagine we're going to find aliens by peeping at them. We're going to look through the telescope. There they are. They're coming. They're on that planet there. Maybe Weber telescope will look at the planet and see the oxygen, the atmosphere, and there's them, or we'll see them flying towards us. And little green men, these days, I know, they think the Navy has pictures of UFOs flying around and all that. This idea that there's in spaceships out there on the planet coming to us or flying around is all from Carl Sagan, because it was Sagan's own personal fantasy about what extraterrestrials would be. There's no basis whatsoever. It's like talking about elves or angels. Why is Carl Sagan's notion about angels any more valid than anybody else's? And it was very much a physicist's idea of aliens. Like, he thought there'd be polar bears on Mars. He said there'd be floating bubbles in Jupiter, for example. He said there's probably carpets of bacteria on Venus. So these are all sensible kind of physical things that would flow out of a physicist's perspective on the universe. But what's missing, what was always missing from all these accounts, from Drake's accounts, from Hollywood's accounts, is the mental aspect. These are minds. These are societies. These are civilizations. These are things communicating. These are agents. Like, Sagan treated them like, he famously said, aliens are going to speak the language of science. Because Carl Sagan speaks the language of science. Aliens are not speaking language. They're speaking the same language as us. They're agents. Aliens will speak the language of scientists. The aliens are cooks and drivers and all these other things. No, they're not going to speak the language of science. Why would they speak the language of science? There was a recent movie called Arrival. I don't know if either of you saw it. It's about it's a Hollywood movie about contact. I love it because I'm always saying physicists imagine themselves in this dominant role, that they're going to be the ones leading the way when we have these conversations with aliens. But if you just even think about it in the most basic terms, as the writers of Arrival did, what the heck's a physicist going to do? So in Arrival, they actually meet aliens. It's straight out of Carl Sagan's fantasy. Like, Carl Sagan could have written this. These 7-tentacled aliens, heptapods, come down from the sky in spaceships with future technology. Somehow they've mastered gravity, but they haven't figured out how to program a natural language processor yet, apparently. So we have to figure out, even though they can bend gravity around stars, they haven't done the basic language process that we figured out in the 1990s. So they send a team of scientists, including a physicist, played by Jeremy Renner. I don't know why anybody thought he should be a physicist, to go. And what does the physicist do during the entire time? He's got no role. He just sits around saying, good job to the linguist. They have a mind scientist there. It's the mind scientist's job to communicate with alien. It's my field. That's what we do. Negotiation, communication, diplomacy, social structures. This is the crap you need to talk to aliens. You don't need to know electronic.
Yeah,
I think it's hilarious that Carl Sagan on the golden plaque that he sent as our first human contact with aliens, he's got like the chemical formula for sugar. Who the heck cares? Have you ever had a conversation with any stranger where you felt the need to talk about chemical structures of things as a conversation opener? It's ridiculous. And neither does the linguist. The linguist doesn't talk about the chemical structure of sugar. She spends the whole time trying to figure out how to communicate. And the physicist's only job in Arrival is to make babies with the linguist. They end up getting married and they have kids. That's the only job for the physicist. And aliens, that seems pretty accurate to me.
There's this.
I don't mean to knock you. I know you guys are physicists. I'm sure there's a role for you.
We're a little bit of everything. There's this really preeminent scholar of religious studies who's been on the show named Diana Pasulka, and she's turned her lens in recent years towards the UAP UFO phenomenon. And we had a really good conversation with her about that. But at the very end, she mentioned that her new work is about going into indigenous communities and talking to them about their experiences. And she mentioned just kind of one throw-off comment. We were about to get off the phone, and she was like, yeah, a lot of these people are reporting to me that, the extraterrestrials are already here, and they're not these physical bodies. They're actually inside of people's minds. They're inside of the smartphones. They're inside of the ephemeral interactions that are happening. And this seemed and I didn't get a chance to really unpack that with her, but it resonates very deeply with what you're reporting here, which is quite fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, we're designed to detect agency and project agency, even when this is why cartoons work so well, or we imagine stuffed animals come alive. So much of our mind is designed to detect agency in our environment and project agency onto things. So it's never surprising that people think of aliens could be anywhere. Aliens in the phone, aliens in our brain, very common.
Yeah, it was just interesting that the indigenous people weren't thinking about it in terms of the Carl Sagan narrative at all, at least from her basic reports. And I don't know if she's published any of this work yet.
We should get her back to.
Wait, so you're saying the native people thought that the gods or aliens are in the phones, for example?
It wasn't totally clear, but they definitely weren't physical beings. In at least the preliminary research that she had done, she had just, I think, done some interviews with different people, and their understanding of what extraterrestrial superior intelligence would look like was not these beings showing up in spaceships. It was a presence that shows up in humanity, which I thought was really fascinating and somewhat congruent with the story that you've been telling us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's our own mind, and so it's getting in touch with your own mind, and our mind is filled with purposeful networks and purposeful activity. I broke it down. Like each module's got its own purpose. Each neuron's got it's full of purpose. So our mind engaging itself feels like we're engaging with a separate purposeful entity, and there are purposeful entities out there too. So. Distinguishing between them is going to be difficult. It can be difficult.
So you are still working on the book, and you're in the process of getting it published.
Yes.
Haven't finished it yet. Have you reached out to anybody yet about it?
I submitted it to my editor who published Journey of the Mind, Norton. They published that last book. So my editor there's got it. He just got it. So it's going to take him some time to read through it. So we'll see what happens.
Do you have a sense of what you want to work on next once the book is out?
So when I first sat down to write the book, it was huge. It was going to be around 500,000 pages. I mean, there's so many things to share and say. So I had to rethink it. So I'm splitting it apart into several different books. For example, there's something I call the reality game, which is a way to, now that I understand all this in my day-to-day life, how I interact and engage with the world with this heavy knowledge, I mean, it is a burden to hold all this and interact with people. I know that yesterday I was talking to five, an extraterrestrial, and now, I'm having dinner with my mother. Like there's all kinds of these incongruencies in my life that are hard to manage.
Does your mom know?
No, not yet.
Oh, wow.
But I'm publishing the book, and so she'll read it. Yeah.
So she's going to find out a lot inside of it. So does anybody in your family know? Does your wife know?
My wife does. Yes. Yes. When I was deciding to get married to my wife, one of the things I was aware of, I guess it's a criteria. I keep calling it a criteria, but it was, thinking through, one day I'm going to have to share this stuff, and what's going to happen to the marriage when this comes out. And so, I married someone I thought it would work out, and it did. So, but I got lucky, I guess, and I considered it, but I didn't know until it happened. And so she's okay with it.
How did you manage to keep this from your mom? Because if you're at MIT and you're going to the dean and you're telling the dean that you're having these experiences, and then you get kicked out,
they just thought they thought I did drugs and had a psychotic experience. That's how they interpreted it. Yeah.
And it was just, I mean, I guess families have a tendency of doing that, where it's like when there's something like really traumatic and difficult, they just never really revisit it. They're like, "You're fine now, right?" And you're just like, "Yeah."
Yeah, everybody does. Everybody does that when they encounter someone having beliefs or experiences that they can't make sense of. This is what I'm now discovering, is that I thought when people hear my story, they're either going to be, he's psychotic, or he's making it up. But it's turning out people have all kinds of ways to explain what's happening. They just kind of, oh, he's a little bit crazy, but not psychotic. He's just a little mentally ill. Or people say, oh, I'm very artistic. I just have this artistic imagination that's imagining these things. Or it's like religion. Like I'm like Islam. I believe the world works this way, and Christians believe another. Now that I'm talking to people, I find that people very easily generate some story about me, that fits what they know about the world, because nobody's going to go along and think what I'm saying is true. But apparently, it's really hard for people to conceive of me as psychotic. I guess because I'm not a kid and I'm not acting crazy. I got a house, I got a child, I'm married. I can talk articulately. So saying that I'm psychotic, that I believe I'm talking to aliens and psychotic, apparently people have a hard time with that. Their brain's not allowing them to just say I'm psychotic. They need some other story to account for.
You're too lucid to justify psychotic, right? It's not like it's a disconnected narrative. It's not like it's this pieces of things flying all over the place. It's a very sort of, I mean, it's a surreal narrative. I'll agree with that, but
there's a functionality to it too, right? Which is like, why do people end up in a hospital when they're psychotic? Well, because they're dysfunctional, right?
Yeah, and so you don't have any of the hallmarks.
I would love to ask you guys, truly, I would love for you guys to speak about this. I can't, this is like my number one curiosity now, is that, so from my point of view, I've had these experiences, 30 years, it wasn't like one vague thing out in the woods. I mean, you've read the book, so it's experience after experience, and I structured my life around it. I made a movie with this. I've done all kinds of things. I wrote a novel in Russia about my whole life is in this, and it keeps happening. And they talk to me, and they share math. I just share with you a mathematical framework for consciousness that was in part derived from what extraterrestrials share with me. You guys hear this. How do you frame it? You say I'm not psychotic, that I'm lucid, but you also, I mean, you're not saying that this actually happened. I am genuinely curious how you guys are processing it and how your minds are like making sense of it. I'd love to hear you guys talk about that.
Well, for me, it's not entirely foreign sounding of an experience, right? I oriented my entire being towards music when I was growing up. And to a large extent, I'm still oriented towards music, and that's the way that I perceive things. And, it's kind of common knowledge among artists, musicians, composers, that you really, in order to write, you really are just tuning into something that is already there, right? Music is something, those resonances sound good to everyone. I can play a minor chord, it sounds sad to you. I can play a major chord, it sounds happy. And that's a universal experience. And so in a sense, when you sit down to compose, especially I think the more advanced you get into it, or let's say the more time, more experience you have with it, most musicians will tell you that they're tuning in. They feel like a radio. And this really happens on stage when you're performing and you have all of that energy of all the people focused together. You really feel at some point like you're channeling something that is absolutely outside of you. And so it's a kind of normal experience. I don't know if it's the same experience, but I imagine that it's in the same vein, which is that I do have the ability to tune into something else that is giving me the piece that I am putting down later on the tape machine or in a performance. So yeah, it doesn't seem that wacky to me personally as an artist and coming up through that. I don't have it with math, although sometimes in physics I do. I do see things sometimes. And so what about you, Anastasia?
I think for me, I have an intuition for mechanism, that it's not necessarily for music, because I grew up in a weird condition where we were Soviet immigrants, and so I wasn't on any team sports. I wasn't really allowed to have friends. I never did music, and so I had this very abridged experience in childhood. It was very, very... I think that my parents were worried that America was going to steal their children, which happens to a lot of immigrant families. And so we've stayed really close, but that means that it was like a very confining experience. But something that I always had was that I seemed to understand mechanistically how things worked and how people worked. And this is the kind of stuff where somebody does something and they have no idea why they've done it. And I can talk to them for just a few minutes and I can be like, this is why this happened. This is where this is coming from. This is how you can fix it. And it comes fully formed in this understanding of the dynamics inside of them, even though I'm not inside of them. And so obviously there's not an external voice that's delivering it to me. And I don't go to a place, though I have gone to places when having these psychedelic experiences. And it's interesting because it's not a persistent place that I can reach, but there's definitely this kind of cavern in my mind that I can go into, and there's like creatures that live in it that I've interacted with. But it wasn't a frightening experience. It didn't strike me as being extraterrestrial. It was just like, oh, well, this is where my intuition comes from. And so to hear you describe it as such, I'm kind of like, well, this is not the experience that I've had, and it sounds like you've oriented yourself more towards it in a way that has allowed you to develop it further and further. Where I can imagine that if I devoted myself exclusively to it, that I would be able to amplify it in the way that you have leaned into your own experiences. And so I guess it doesn't sound so foreign. I'm like, well, yeah, this is just a thing that happens, and it almost relieves me to hear you talk about it, because I'm like, okay, so this comes in various shapes and sizes and to varying degrees, and by talking to you, I can understand what would happen if you leaned into it. And I feel that edge of fear too, because it's like the life that I have is defined by not leaning into certain things. Because when you lean into something, you know that it's going to be a transformative experience, and you know that you will come out the other side completely different. And I kind of come up to that edge and I feel around it, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to sink into that pond yet. And so I don't know. I feel like that's maybe where the resonance with you comes from, which is that we share some of the experiences that you're talking about without going into that degree of like full abandonment to them.
I think, Anastasia, you and Shiloh captured something that's important and real, which, like Shiloh, you talked about, with music, you can go there, but it would be like, now let's say you start developing your ability to do so that you can do that more easily in a more targeted fashion and create entire symphonies, or whatever your, ballads or epic. You can create very complicated, rich works of music by following this strategy, and then make a whole album of lots of songs.
I do, yeah. I mean, I do. I probably make a new album every year of these pieces, and I'm just increasingly aware that all I have to do is put myself in this mindset and hear it. I mean, it sounds corny, but I literally sometimes I hear an entire piece all at once. I'll literally hear it, like, and I might not have the funny thing is, the last time this happened to me, I heard this symphony playing the piece, actually, and I was like, oh, geez, how am I going to get a symphony to record this, right? And then I had to come back to, back to earth and be like, oh yeah, Shiloh, you can actually only play all these other instruments, so you're going to have to find a way to translate it, and maybe it's going to be blunted in some way because you can't make a symphony, but I was still able to take all of the essential pieces and use the instruments that I do play and track something together. And at the end of the day, I feel like I did that, but all I was doing was executing something that appeared to me fully formed. And it sounds nuts to people who haven't experienced this, because they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, no, I like heard it. I literally heard the sound in my head of this happening all at once with the words and everything. Or at least like really with the words and everything. And so it's just not, it doesn't seem, I don't know, it didn't seem supernatural to me at the time, but I guess it kind of is. But it just doesn't seem foreign.
It's not personified. And I think that the unique thing that you're talking about is a deep personification where there's a voice that speaks. And I've never experienced that. And so I think that that's the place where it diverges, because it's something that happens inside of me, but it's not something that translates externally.
But Anastasia, you gave that example, your mechanistic mind, and you think of mechanical things. But I imagine it would be like if, you started following that and you saw the design for, a machine or a structure, or an appliance, I see a guitar back there. So you maybe imagine the mechanics for designing a new kind of guitar, and then that expands and you come up with a whole bunch of musical instruments, and then, that you keep building and building and building on that by following your intuition, by leaning into it. And you discover that, if you lean into it in certain ways, that you'll get more productive ideas and that they'll cohere together, and that you can, from small beginnings, can generate much bigger structures, more easily. It's a lot like that. I mean, that's. I
mean, Anastasia is definitely more oriented. I know she used the word mechanism, but what she really means is cause of effect. And I know Anastasia is certainly more oriented towards social cause and effect versus body-centric, mechanical, physical cause and effect.
Well, I think that we work on this physics project together, and it's really interesting because I feel kind of what's the opposite of resonance?
Discordance?
Yeah, there's like a discordance, because I'm not a person that is by nature interested in objects. I'm like interested in the things that objects will let me do in order to help people and to fix people. But still, like, Shiloh always pulls me into it, because he's like, hey, we need to figure out what the atom is doing in order to generate light. And, I think that he has to kind of wrestle me into it. But once he actually wrestles me into it, I'm like, okay, well, obviously this is how these pieces fit together, and this is the motion of them, and this is probably what's happening when it comes to generating a photon. But it's very, I think that it comes down to the fact that I came from this family that was so conflict-oriented. And so there's just all of this just raw pain that was always there. And so I kind of turned myself to this idea where I'm like, okay, well, maybe it's possible to fix that inside of people. And I think that that's something that I've really oriented myself to, where I'm like, look, there is internal cause and effect of experience and of trauma and of pain that is translated to action, and the action is taking place on a level that's not conscious for you. But if you were to sit down and to go through this processing, you can figure it out really quickly, to the degree that, like, when Shiloh and I fight, there's a crazy thing that happens, because I'll get really upset, and then I'll go sit somewhere, and within a few minutes I can take apart the situation and be like, okay, this is where this broke, this is where this broke, this is where this broke, this is how we can fix it. And I can go to Shiloh and I can present him the entire arc of like, this is this conflict. This is where the conflict.
Does he accept it?
Almost. It usually takes some time, but I think that it.
I don't think that I would be married if it wasn't to you, because I'm just completely shutting off usually historically when I run into conflicts like that. And, I think your persistence and your ability to actually figure out how things could move more smoothly is the reason that we're even still here.
Well, because I'm like, look, I think that most human problems come down to the fact that people's animal reptile brains are reacting to the circumstances that they're in. And I have this perhaps almost psychotic belief where I'm like, look, if you put me in a room with people and everybody is invested in solving whatever problems are there, we can solve any problem that we're confronted by. And I don't know where that belief comes from, because it's not like my life is characterized by being able to solve every single problem I've ever encountered. Like, my family's still kind of, like, I've never been able to solve my family, right? Like, these are people that are totally independent of me, and they have their own preferences, and they have their own way of dealing with conflict, and I can't force them into it. And so the tack that I've had to take is I'm like, okay, well, I used to be really unsettled by it. And so by getting to a place where I can work through all of that and no longer be unsettled, then perhaps I can pull them along behind me. And I think that that's the place where I see something otherworldly, because I can process these things quicker than other people. And I seem to have insights that come from somewhere that aren't me, because it comes fully formed, where I'm like, oh, okay, this is the arc, and this is how all the pieces fit together. And this is if you tweak this piece and you tweak this reaction and you integrate this other past thing, then you can get through and you can get to the other side, and everything will make sense, and you can just let go of all the pain and you can just live. And wouldn't that be beautiful?
Yeah, that's great. I think it's absolutely wonderful that the two of you have a joint dynamic of conflict resolution. I guess it sounds like it's driven by Anastasia, but at least, Shallow's got to go along with it too. So I think successful relationships, the natural dynamics of the two people, move towards conflict resolution. If they move towards increasing conflict, the relationship at some point won't last.
Well, the only thing that I have changed in my new version of myself, in this whatever adult version, is that I fundamentally want to do better. That's it. That's the only thing. And so if Anastasia is like, whatever the conflict, if she can orient it towards, hey, don't you think you could have done this better? I'm like, yeah, for sure. Like, there's absolutely no doubt that almost anything I do, I could have done better. And so
it sounds like her mind is very naturally devoted to thinking about how things could be better. She naturally analyzes that and sees that. So that's a great combination.
And that's the crazy thing, because I'm like, look, not everybody wants to do better. And that's the hardest thing, because
I had to make that switch. I really had to make that switch.
I remember that, yeah, there was like a distinct...
Because I grew up in a world where you are how you are, and you just accept it or move on. And that's how I lived my life for probably the first 30 years. And I don't know. I don't know what it was that made me make that switch, but
I'm like,
so important, that switch.
The world is filled with people, and they fall on this gradient of I can do better or I can't do better. And there's lots of terms that people use to describe that. I think that it's I can't remember the name of, there's like a specific cognitive framework for this. Growth mindset, right? The growth mindset is the idea that, like, we were here, we can do better. And I think that this ties into your idea of love and compassion, because I'm like, that is the answer to the ills of humans and the ills of the universe and the questions that we have about our own stability and our own existence. And I've been so preoccupied by those questions that I feel like it's prevented me from being able to function in traditional environments, because I'm like, how can we do anything except for figure out how this is going to do good? And when I'm in a laboratory and we're writing grants and it's about this stuff that everybody in the lab knows is probably not going to work out, or it's not applicable, and it's just, I worked in a lab in grad school that was developing these neural shanks, that's the word I was going to say, shunts, neural shanks, to be able to read and record and manipulate the activity of thousands of neurons at a time. And it was funded by DARPA. And I remember always being like, why are we doing this? Like, this isn't, are we sure that this is going to be a net good for the world? Like, are we sure that the moral responsibility that is upon us is being fully considered? Because nobody ever talked about, is this good? Is this right? And so I see people being able to shut that off. And I've never been able to. And it's been a huge conflict in my life, because I'm like, if I just stopped feeling this, everything would be fine, because I could just perform the action and do the thing and then, like, I don't know, pick up golf or something.
Well, bless you, Anastasia. I'm glad you are the way you are.
But But so I don't know. I don't know if that is to you, if that feels like the same category of event that you're having with Intex or not.
Yeah, I think for both Shiloh's music and what you're talking about too, it's a mind. I have my mind, and so I'm putting it somewhere, and I'm placing the focus on something and immersing in something with an attitude of I'm going to learn and get better. The idea of trying to get better has always been fundamental to all of my experiences. I've ever since this happened, I've been trying to get better. In the book, you guys probably read this. I compare my life to Flowers for Algernon, which is this novel. I think it's a novel from the 1950s or 1960s. It's about a man with a low IQ, considered retarded. That's the term they used back then and in the book. And they perform some operation on his brain that slowly and steadily makes him smarter and smarter and smarter. And I feel like that's been my life too. Like I started out in a place of ignorance and very low and troubled and lost, and I've just never stopped improving and growing. And I think that gets you through so much. It gets you through so many quandaries. I mean, Anastasia, just like you said, I think for us as a race too, it's like if we're all just embracing the desire to improve ourselves and get better and get those answers, that if that is our purpose, that all of that purpose will form some structure to get us there. That is what I think. If we are all agents trying to improve ourselves and human society, our civilization, our lives of others, if that's what we're all doing, we will get there. And the challenge is just not giving up, not letting other people give up. I
think there's something really liberating to it too. Like when you realize that you are a being and not you're not a have been, right? So you don't have to identify with all the things you've done if you can identify with what you can do in the future, right? And
it's very empowering.
So liberating once you have that realization.
Yes.
And I also think that there's another part of this, which is that there's this sense of an external and universal view that I can slot into, where I'm like, people always talk about the difficulty of being able to establish what is good and what is right. And I've never really had that problem, and I'm always confused. We had a moral philosopher on the show at the very beginning, and I remember asking her to define what is good, and she's like, "Oh."
You asked her what is moral. What's morality mean?
Yeah, and she couldn't do it. She's like, "We don't really. I don't have the answer for you," and that to me speaks of this lack of connection to the larger frame. Because certainly there is something there's something that is good, the same way that there are laws of physics that will tell you how gravity works and how light works. There is also the same set of rules for what is good and what you should orient yourself towards. And I think that this contact with something that lies beyond you, beyond Earth, beyond the solar system or galaxy or whatever, is contact with something that is eternal and somehow functional. And I think that functionality is the highest purpose. And it's not the functionality of the present, it's the functionality of the future. Because as far as I can tell, the goal of life is to progress. It is to have a direction that you're moving into. And it's interesting that you say that these axiomatic minds are still in conflict, because what it sounds like is that at the highest level, the conflict is
moral. They're different moral systems,
right?
Mathematical at the ultimate level, math is morality. So they openly communicate that. Like 5 says it is the sum of all the right choices of all the entities that make up it. So like and 5 definitely has a moral position. In my early interactions with 5, they were heavily moral, which I understand I usually don't like to talk about that because that's scary, understandably, and I would be scared too if somebody said I talk to aliens and they give me moral instruction. That's when things get scary, but it was deeply moral. But over time, so my moral values and my sense of the morality of the universe are aligned with 5. 3 has a different set. To me, they're very alien. So when I was young, I thought 3 was evil. I definitely considered 3 divine evil. but now as time's gone by, it's just different. It's choices, it's values, it's moral framing of the universe is just different. It has a different value system, and it's in conflict with 5. I mean, 5 thinks the universe should be one way, and 3 thinks the universe will be better off being another way, and so they're both shaping it as they can and then contesting that. And I felt more compatible with 5. Like I've always felt compatible with 5, even now. Like the love matters, connection matter, all these things we're talking about, the getting better, reaching out, like all of these sorts of things are highly valued by 5. 3 is just different. I have a lot of trouble putting 3 into words. Like when I was younger, I would say, "Oh, it's evil. It just wants to destroy us," but it's not. It wants to change us to fit its own values and its own sense of how the world should be. And just not for me. Probably not for humans. It just doesn't seem human. I think most humans would be compatible with 5, but this is something I'm deeply curious. I really want other people to experience with this. I'd love to tell me that they agree that 5 is like morally compatible with our humanity, and 3 isn't, or if this is just personal something to me being compatible. I'd love to know.
I mean, on a more mundane level, there's obviously consciousnesses that are in conflict with humanity, right? I mean, these termites would probably love to turn my house into a plate of food, but that's in complete conflict with my values, which is maintaining a house that's structurally stable, right? And you see this all over the place, right? I think a lot of our human conflicts are about resources and vision for what should be done. What should we do here? Should we, turn this particular city into a religious state of this order or a religious state of this order? But all over the place, we find ourselves in conflict with different values, essentially.
Well, just the Republicans and Democrats right now in our society, 2 radically different conceptions. I think for anybody alive today, it's the most polarized conceptions of morals and what America should be doing and what a good, fair, healthy America would look like. That's playing out in incredible competition right now. And who's right and wrong? Like I sure don't want to say the Republicans are wrong. I have more in common myself with the Democrats, but I can't say I'm 100% aligned. And personally, I'm glad this is what it should look like. I maybe not this vicious, and I do want democracy protected, but in terms of there just being different visions of America, that's exactly how the system should work, is contesting these visions. I tend to think that basically like what we're seeing with the Democrats and Republicans is pretty much what we're seeing on every scale all the way up, to the very top. It's just different. Like termites want to turn the house into burrows, and we don't want that. Are they immoral?
They're evil, right? I don't think they're
not
evil.
It's a different vision of how physical reality should be arranged.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you have a way that you can put into words the thing inside of 3 that you were really freaked out by?
I don't like to think about 3. One of the troubles too with all of this is because of the nature of it, there's always a risk if I re-immerse myself in it or re-experience or really try to relive it, that I'll be talking with them. It'll happen. I'll go into Intex contact. So, and with 3, because 3 is so alien, but it's just different. It's just incompatible. It's like the termites. That's not a bad thing. And in fact, 3, as a matter of fact, always seemed more compatible with insects. There was something insectoid about it. I always imagined that was my own personal revulsion was projecting this idea onto it, but it was very insecty to me. And it got a 3. Insects have 6 legs, 3, but also the 3-ness, like the 5-ness. These things are deep, and you can't ignore it. Like we got 5 fingers on our hand, 5 toes. There's 5 limbs, head, 2 arms. There's 5 sensory things on our face, sensory modalities on our face. We are an embodiment of 5-ness in some ways, and so it feels very natural. And so when you're interacting with these things, these numbers, they really come into play. It's really hard to communicate, but you feel 5-ness all over. There's a 5-fold nature. Everything's 5 form. It's very, very, very hard to put into words. But I imagine a mathematician would love to be connected with 5. It's just everything turns into 5-ness. and 3, everything turns into 3-ness, and it just creeps me out. Like it's horrible. Yeah,
music is very much a 5 discipline. I don't know if you're aware of that, but you can
no, tell me.
Well, the third overtone of any tone, right, is a fifth. It's a particular ratio with respect to the tonic. And the Western scale, like if I look at a piano, all I have to do is go up by fifths, essentially, in order to build that entire scale out. If I just keep going up by a fifth, I'll eventually end up with our Western scale. And so, and if you make this pentatonic scale, actually, which is based on fifths, you find the skeleton of every single musical system on the planet. If you can plunk me down anywhere on Earth, and at the heart of that musical system is going to be a pentatonic scale. And so, I don't know. It just strikes me as another interesting coincidence that humans are fundamentally, we do music, right? Music is in every culture. There's something fundamental about music with humans, and it is fundamentally a pentatonic construction. So there's just another one to put.
Very, very cool. I just read a book about music, and I didn't know that. So that's awesome. I'm so excited to go read more about that.
Yeah, check it out.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been talking for 3 hours. I think that there is obviously tons more that we can discuss, and I think that we should just talk again a few months down the road. I feel a deep satisfaction talking to you, because I feel like we've come to different realizations about the world from different directions, but they all kind of fit together in this way where I don't know, I really enjoy it.
I love being here and talking to you guys. I love your attitude and your openness, and it leads to new ideas and exploring new domains, and that's what's fun, is trying out ideas. Does this work? What does this lead to? How does this reframe the situation? How does this lead to new perspectives? I think you two are great at opening that up and facilitating that, and so yeah, it feels very great and natural and connected for me to be here too.
Thank you so much, Ogi.
Yeah, thank you, and do consider next spring. I'll send you an email too, just to.
I will. Yeah, please do. Yeah, I definitely am interested for sure.
Fantastic.
All right. Well, let's either way, let's catch up down the line soon. And
Sounds
by
great.
the way, real quick before you go, when's that book coming out? Any idea?
No, I haven't even sold it yet, so I'm not even quite done. I'm about 90% done, so I'm just finishing up right now. But it'll be soon. It'll be within a year. That I'm confident about. It'll be on bookshelves within a year.
All right. Well, we'll definitely keep people informed.
Let me plug Journey of the Mind, which does contain a lot of the science and math I've been talking about, specifically about the ladder of purpose, and we explain how consciousness works in that book. So. Yeah, in the meantime, there's that.
And hopefully, we're in touch with Sai, who said that he might come on the show as well. He seems like
you should. Yeah, he's a lot of fun. You should definitely have him on.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. He only recently learned I talk to extraterrestrials.
He seems to have taken it well from what you write.
Yeah. Great.
All right, Ogi. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, as always.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All
Look forward to coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye, guys.
See ya.